Uchiha Itachi wakes up in a world he doesn't recognize, with a past he would rather forget, an uncertain future, and an unfamiliar name. What would a world-weary shinobi do with this new lease on life? Well, hello there. Omni-sensei here with What If Itachi Uchiha Was Reborn in Jujutsu in the Gojo Clan, Part 1. If you enjoy this content, please smash the like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. I hope you enjoy listening to it.
He woke up. In any other scenario, or if he were any other person, there would be nothing to it. Most people close their eyes and open them back up 5 to 6 hours later, like puppets controlled by unseen threads. He was not like most people. Most people didn't die bleeding out with blurred eyes and a sickly frame, only to wake up at an indescribable later time. Pale gray eyes stared at the wooden beams above his head for what felt like ages, but his keen mind broke it down to only 1 hour, 24 minutes, and 56 seconds. Though his instincts screamed at him to roll off what his back told him was a futon and explore his new surroundings, all he wanted to do was just nothing. He was exhausted, beyond tired, and he hoped it had ended, but hope was a lie. He knew that more than most. Yet, here he was again, staring at a ceiling, knowing this was as real as anything. With his experience with genjutsu, it would take Kami himself to deceive his senses. If left to himself, he would have languished there for however long, but as the sun slowly crept into his room, chasing away the comforting darkness and shadows, he heard a soft knock on what he assumed was a door. A second later, the door slid aside, and a soft and demure voice called out, "Jiki-san." He stayed still, wishing the voice away, yet it called out again, softly, this time with more urgency. The family head would be displeased if he knew you're still in bed. This time, the voice had a touch of fear and pain. Physical pain. He raised himself up on one soft arm, idly noticing the little to no musculature, and looked at the black-haired woman standing at the entrance to his room. With a slow blink and another glance, he reassessed her from a woman to a teen, judging by her still soft cheeks, lack of any wrinkles, and the brightness of her eyes. She was garbed in a black one-piece gown with a white cloth upon it. Her head remained bowed as he quietly observed her. With slow and unfamiliar movements, he got to his feet. The transition from a 5 feet 8 inches lethal physique bred for war to a 3-foot toddling mass of soft flesh and poor motor control would have taken any other person months. But he had it down by the 10th second after getting up and on his 7th step towards the teen. He went from jerky, uncoordinated movements to a refined, smooth pace, and his bare feet barely made a sound on the wooden floor. He stopped directly in front of her bowed head and whispered, "I'm up." She brought her head up and gave him a soft and familiar smile that reminded him of his mother, a smile that radiated immense love and kindness, a smile he smothered and laid to rest for the sake of peace. Something must have shown in his expression, as the teen flinched back. Then followed an unfamiliar routine. He was led out of the house and to a bathroom. Stepping into the bathtub filled with water, he stared at a familiar face with unfamiliar features. The paradoxes of the statement forced him to narrow his eyes, showing his trademark lines below his gray eyes. Bone-white hair fell down his head in waves and tickled his ears while masking his implacable visage of pure apathy. The maid rolled up her sleeves before taking up a pail of water and dumping it above his head. He felt sensations he'd never imagined he'd ever feel again. The rest of the bath was a blur, culminating with the maid toweling him and dressing him in a white hakama and a matching black and white checkered kimono, while his feet were clad in finely textured wooden geta. He ignored the unfamiliar sensation of being dressed and stoically listened to the maid's incessant prattling. He learned that he was a member of the Gojo clan, and today was his 4th birthday, which meant he would be meeting the clan head. His elder cousin had also left earlier for Jujutsu High for his 2nd year. The walk to the clan head was more sedate and quiet, with the maid sending him nervous glances. He ignored them and followed her, a step behind and to the side. They stepped out of the house and walked on well-paved cobblestones that led from his house, which he realized was on the outskirts of the clan compound, to the inner compound. He ignored the stares from his black-haired clan members and the occasional white-haired member as they reached the house in the center, a traditional house that felt more like a fortress than a home. The closer they got, the more wooden his maid's posture, walking steps, and features became. They stood in front of the door for seconds before she mustered the courage to finally knock. She barely touched the doors before they opened slowly. She stopped there and gave him a look that was equal parts fear, begging, and desperation. He stared into her eyes, gray into black, and tried to decipher what she was screaming at him with her eyes. His efforts proved futile, so he did the only thing he hoped would ease her. He slipped his little pale hand into her rougher palms before giving it a slight squeeze. Her resulting grip was instinctual. He gave her a soft nod before heading in. The door closed shut behind him, leaving him trapped in a dark house. His eyes slowly adapted to the darkness as he patiently waited. The dark was not an enemy. It was as comforting as a mother's touch. He was born in it, molded by it. Half his life was spent in it. He had no fear of it. He took soft steps as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, sliding his feet while leaving his arms folded in the kimono. It took him a minute to reach the end of the hallway, where the door swung open and led him into a cavernous room with tatami mats spread out at the end. He let his eyes fall into a half-lidded gaze instead of blinking, as the harshness of the room's sudden light requested of him. The room was ringed by bronze statues, each depicting a man sitting in seiza with extreme features ranging from maniacal smiles to wrathful expressions. All held prayer beads and looked at the person in the middle. Even from his distance, he felt something malicious from the mun seated in the middle. Not necessarily chakra, but an aura that permeated the surroundings and choked him in a way that almost made him stagger. His wide eyes and hitched breath were his only show of emotion at the suffocating aura. The elderly man opened his eyes and stared at him before nodding at a mat directly placed in front of him. He replied with his own nod before walking to it and sitting with his legs tucked and his hands placed palm-flat on his lap. The elder closed his eyes once more, giving him the opportunity to study his features. With skin so pale, he must have never felt the sun in decades, yet he bore musculature that spoke of a fighter, with a black kimono that looked as though it were tailored for him as he sat, bearing nary a wrinkle. His glance shifted to the statues surrounding them, cataloging their features. He had barely started on the third before the man's eyes opened once more, and he gave him a look that drew his complete attention. "Gojo Jiki," his voice came out raspy and rough. "Do you want to be a sorcerer?" The conversation that followed that question shaped the next 2 years of his life. He stepped out of the house with a shallow idea of curses, cursed techniques, the 3 great clans, his family, and his place in it. It also gave him an idea of why his maid was so scared of him walking in. His mother died while giving birth to him, and his father, a mediocre sorcerer by the clan head's standard and rather spiteful man, named him Jiki on the spot, for his birth brought about her death. His next 4 years before his awakening were spent being taken care of by his maid, Aiko. The black-haired teen had practically raised him from birth like her own child and feared for the choices that would be laid before him as a direct descendant of Michizane Sugawara and a member of the Gojo clan. The clan head's clear lack of interest in him after his decision dropped his standings in the clan by a fair amount. But he had no interest in being part of such a life again. This world was as close to having peace as he ever imagined compared to his last. He saw no reason to stand at the forefront anymore. His elder cousin, bearing the weight of the clan's once-in-a-century dojutsu and the burdens that came with it, brought memories of his own time as clan heir. Memories he would rather have left forgotten on that broken world. He spent the next 2 years in his clan's library and learned so much about this new world. He had assumed the elemental nations and this earth were similar, but after a glance at the world map, the wars fought, the histories told, and the alliances formed, he was certain now that he was nowhere near the elemental nations. The easy access to technology that he had, even in his apparent isolationist clan, was more than even the top heads in the hidden villages ever received. He spent his days on mundane things, trying to live a life he never had the opportunity to live. From paintings in the morning with Aiko to working on his writing and calligraphy alone in the library among clanmates that had little to no love for him. Yet, he didn't care for it. Any other child would have craved the attention of family. Perhaps that was the old bastard's plan when he set all this into motion. But not Itachi. He didn't deserve the love of a new family. Not after he slaughtered his last for the sake of peace. Not after what he had done in the Umbu in the guise of orders from commanders. No, Itachi saw northwest reason to get close to this new family, and the distance most of them kept suited him and made it all the better. The only light in his dark world of apathy, angst, and horrible memories was Aiko. Where most clan members had shut him out and moved on with their lives, Aiko stuck even closer to him. His first painting was of her smile as she helped bathe him. And like all things Itachi had tried his hand at, it was as perfect as it could be. The dark of her hair was wrapped in a bun under a white cloth, the strands that escaped at the sides moving with a soft early morning breeze. Her hands were covered in foam as she washed his white locks while whispering sweet nothings to him. The radiant glow of a woman that was happy and loved what she did, bright smile she only showed to him when they were together. After his first work, she took it and, with tears in her eyes, hugged him so tight she would have broken his spine if she kept it up any longer. The next day, he woke up with an easel, a canvas with ultra-smooth, fine, and coarse brushes lining the aisles, and a beautiful number of colors on the side, courtesy of the clan head himself. He was confused, and for the first time in a long time, he was forced to reassess the old man's opinion of him. Didn't he despise him for wanting to live a mundane life? For the death of his daughter? It took him his second painting, which was of the bronze figures he saw in the mansion, to disappear the following morning from his aisle, only to reappear once more on the doors of that forbidding house for him to realize his mistake. He had automatically assumed the clan head was much like the Uchiha clan elders, who would try to shape and mold the younger ones into what they wanted. Who cared more about bloodlines, cursed ability, status, and martial prowess than what other skills a child would have to offer? He knew most clans were like that considering his forays into the clan library, but it just occurred to him that he never even gave his clan leader a chance. The slip-up was a show of his humanity. Inasmuch as the Uchiha clan elders and Konoha tried to make him perfect, he wasn't. He was as human as everyone else. The thought brought a smile to his face. A smile that was covered in a bright flash a second later by what appeared to be his maid with what he learned was a camera. She gave him an even brighter smile than he believed he could ever possess before skipping out of his workshop. Days later, he started hearing the whispers once more. The accursed words that brought so much suffering to his past life. Genius. Prodigy. The side glances that he got from his clan members changed from apathy to interest. How many 5-year-old children could recreate the beautiful images and finely detailed artworks he produced so easily? At the end of the day, he was able to get past it, as despite the similarities in the words, the context differed. Here nobody was praising his genius for finding the perfect angle to slit a man's jugular and carotid in a single stroke. He was not called a prodigy here for learning how to modify and draw explosive tags on the spot. No. He was praised for the mundane art of painting. His art was usually visceral. Images burnt into his brain. A curse and blessing of the Sharingan, a past life filled with enough horror to break lesser men. He was given a small building in the compound and to the side of his building to display his art, from paintings of the beautiful blood-stained grasses of Kusagakure to the withering heavy snow and eternal winters of Yukigakure. He painted island villages from the elemental nations, where the sun, for some reason, rose once in 2 years, to the liminal and fluid nature of the various summoning realms, the unending skies and immutable mountains of the home of the hawks, to the everlasting darkness of the home of the crows and the albino red-eyed matriarch that perched on a dead tree. If he was going to bring back anything from his cursed origins, it was going to be the beauty of the places he saw during his years of wandering with the Akatsuki. His years of mundanity and bliss ended with a simple question that led to a future he could not have calculated or considered. A fickle chance, fate, or horrid luck. At the age of 6, after a long day of working on his calligraphy, he looked up at his maid, Aiko-chan, and made a request that would change the course of his life. Born of the memories of jumping from cafe to cafe with Sasuke as children during festivals. "I want to go to a cafe," he whispered in his soft voice. Aiko-san looked at him for a second before giving a soft smile and acquiescing. "I'll see what can be done, young master." A week later, he woke up, followed his regular routine, and when it was time to be dressed, instead of his regular yukatas, hakama, and heiori, he was dressed in a baggy black long-sleeved shirt and white shorts that stopped before his knees, while his hair was tied into a bun at the back with only a few stubborn strands escaping it. His feet were clad in black slides as he stared at his maid with uncertainty. She noted his surprise with a smile and announced to him, "The clan head has agreed to your request." He gave a soft nod as he followed her from their house to the main gates of their compound. A compound he had spent the last 2 years in. They were met by a mun in a black suit and a soft frown as he gestured at them to get into a matching black car. Seated inside as the car drove past the isolated clan compound and into the city, he realized the reason for his change of clothes. Not a single person was dressed formally like the rest of the clan, and dressing like that would have drawn attention in a way that some part of him that spent decades in the shadows winced. As they stepped out and walked into a cafe, his head was on a swivel, looking at everything and anything. It was one thing to see the pictures, and it was another thing to live it. Tokyo was easily 5 times more populated than any hidden village he knew about. And this was just a single city in a country that housed tens of them. His sightseeing was cut short as he started to notice them. Most of them were little malformed-looking creatures stuck on some specific humans. He saw a bigger one that stayed on a building. Twice as big as a horse, skin an uncanny blue, or arms that sank into the stone like a hot knife through butter, and a multitude of eyes that lined its back and seemed focused on him. It watched them walk into the cafe, without moving from the spot. Aiko-san didn't seem to notice the creature, blissfully unaware as she pointed at everything that was on display. From boy bands on billboards to clothes and more. The strange and quiet man dressed in black gave it a side glance before leading them into the cafe. It was at their 5th location that it all changed. They stayed in a queue for minutes waiting to be served a type of strange variation of dango that Aiko-chan promised was heavenly. Their driver and escort had his head on a swivel with a heavy frown on his face since their 4th stop and excused himself after a short conversation with Aiko. It was this overload of this new experience that had him lower his guard and let something slip past. It started off as a spike of what he knew to be cursed energy from close by, before a blue blurred figure was a step away from him. Then someone clothed in black with wide and terrified eyes stepped in front of him and pushed him to the side before disappearing in a blur. It took him a second to realize what happened. For his immense intellect to parse through the details of what felt like a split second. For the first time in this new life, he felt something. Something that broke his facade of apathy, as he noted the thick texture of freshly spilled blood that soaked his white hair and splashed on his right cheek. He stared at the broken and unmoving form that lay crumpled and bleeding at the side of a building. At the Polaroid picture that slipped out of the cloth to sink in the blood split. A picture bearing a white-haired boy with a soft smile. Itachi had been angry in his past life. Angry at the situation that forced him to slaughter his clan. Angry that he was forced to work with some of the most horrible people he knew, all for the sake of his village. Angry at the path he forced his little Ototo on. But he had never known hate. Yet the moment he felt it, he knew it for what it was. There was something about the purity of it. Where mind, body, and soul focused on one emotion. Aligned and in sync. Where you knew at that point in time, nothing could stop you from ending something. Even Kami would come down begging on folded knees, and you would still accomplish what you wanted to do. The world could crumble and be damned. All 30 million souls in the city could be snuffed out as a result, and you would feel nothing other than the desire to complete a purpose. He knew hate for the first time in 2 lifetimes. It was almost like a dam had broken in him. He felt that hate flow through him. It called out like an old friend. Following long-forgotten pathways before leading up to his eyes, the clarity of vision that came with the feeling burnt the image of the crumpled form in black and white into his spinning pupil as it split and multiplied from 1 to 3 before folding on itself into another shape, in a rapid procession that most would have missed. He looked at the curse staring at him with its multiple eyes, an arm stretched out to grab him, and its skin splitting vertically in the middle of its face to reveal a carnivorous maw. Heedless of the shouting and the movements of the masses by this intrusion into their worldview. This is a break in the pattern of their scripted lives. He said a single word that left his throat raw. A word, a sentence, a promise, an order, a command that he expected the world to roll over to accomplish. With blood trailing down his left eye, he said, "Die." The jutsu was familiar. His ocular abilities erased the need for any hand signs, and it sprang into existence like an unwanted child finally shown love for the first time. Amaterasu was a beautiful jutsu. Effective at both attack and defense, at his peak, if he so desired, he could have rendered almost anything to ash in seconds. Yet he was not at his peak, not even anywhere close. It was that and the fact that whatever rank the cursed creature was, it was smart. Or had enough instincts to mimic it. It went from an arm outstretched to jumping back the moment the black flames began to blossom. He had aimed for the head, yet its reflective flinch back at the activation of a curse technique saved its life. It went from a sure kill to an obvious drawn-out fight. The heavenly illumination blossomed on its right hand and black flames spread along its blue skin like liquid fire. His sheer hatred for the creature fueled its unending fire. It let out an unholy screech while sending out its other 3 arms in a bid to crush him. He felt the noticeable loss in his cursed energy, enough to make him stagger back at the cost of the technique and shut his left eye immediately. Even in his former life, it was not a technique he used lightly, and never at the beginning of a fight. It was a hammer of Kami, meant to destroy any hope of victory. The predictive nature of the Sharingan saved him. Where he had barely noticed the curse move as a blur, this time he saw the grotesque fist move for his head. He tilted his head back and allowed his body to follow, almost falling flat backward before previously unused core muscle stopped him halfway and whipped him back up after the curse had withdrawn its fist. He twisted to the side to dodge one massive fist the size of his torso, cursed energy moving through his body and reinforcing both muscles, bones, and nerves. With his familiarity with chakra reinforcement, he took to it like a fish in water. He took a step to the side to dodge an overhead blow that cratered the ground and sent shrapnel at him and dust into the surroundings. A simple cursed energy-enhanced leap back took him out of the cover of the dust. He had barely gotten to his feet before a tail swipe flew out from the dust cloud. The curse was using one of the best techniques at hand in fighting an inexperienced Sharingan user by sheer dumb luck. The dust covered the movement of the tail long enough for him to be unable to react fast enough to dodge. For all his proficiency with chakra reinforcement, this was a body using the technique for the first time, young, malleable, and soft. It could not bear the strain of heavy reinforcement, especially with his use of Amaterasu. 6 seconds into the fight and he could already feel the ache in his muscles, the creak in his bones, and the strain on his brain, forcing a mental acuity he could not keep up with. The blow hit him like a ton of bricks, slamming into his midriff and folding him along the width of the tail. He could hear his ribs creak at the blow, idly noticing one snap, but this was not going to be the end. He held onto the tail and followed the momentum of the attack before releasing it midair. High above the sky, he stared at it for a second. The dust cloud was dissipating. The creature had lost a hand and was in the process of losing another while the flames climbed up to its neck. It kept thrashing and rolling on the floor in a futile attempt at putting out the flames. But the black flames stuck close to it, its ever-hungry flames consuming and growing. Slower than if he had consciously nurtured it, yet faster than any natural flame had a right to. His blood-soaked hair whipped around him, pulled out of its carefully crafted bun due to the short yet intense high-speed combat. He fell back towards the creature, ready to risk it all. His left eye was open once more, another Amaterasu on its way before an oversized axe slammed into the creature fast and hard enough to send out a shockwave and send it flying into a car with guts and viscera spilling out. He was caught midair by a calloused hand that folded his small body into a ball as he felt the impact of the person slamming into the pavement at bone-rattling speed, even with reinforcement. He looked up at his savior and noted the young face stuck in an empty scowl of the driver. The suited man kept his focus on the curse, watching it crawl out of the wreckage of the car. Its unholy screech unabated as the black fire consumed more of it. The stench of burning meat was familiar to a man that spent half his life in war. The driver seemed surprised at the sight before acknowledging that it won't be moving to him. When his eyes met Itachi's, he almost dropped him at the sight of his eyes. Itachi shrugged a bit, and he was let down to stagger for a second, while the driver kept a hand on his shoulder to stabilize him. He sensed the second person and turned his head to look behind him. Mao Mao, you Gojo sure are breeding terrifying monsters this generation. Takumi-san's bill is definitely going up, the light blue-haired woman said with a soft smile and squinted eyes as she walked up to them, axe on her shoulder. The edges of her long black skirt were splattered with blood. The driver's grip on his shoulders intensified. What terrifying eyes on such a beautifully crafted face. How would you like to model and make us some money, eh? He kept up his stare as the woman dropped to a squat to stare at him with a big smile on her face, ignoring the driver beside him. A gasp for breath broke his focus on her as his Sharingan flicked to the crumpled form of Aoki. He made to stagger towards her in shock before a blur went past him to the maid and checked up on her. He had thought her dead. The sheer relief that single gasp of breath brought him could not be put into words. A soft smile had begun to break out before he heard the damning words. She's not likely to survive such wounds, the blue-haired woman pronounced after looking at Aiko. She turned to the driver. We are barely 20 minutes from the Gojo clan, correct? The driver agreed with a nod, an even deeper frown on his face as he had an idea of where she was going with her questions. I'm only barely good enough to stem her wounds with my reverse cursed technique. We take her there, and Takumi-san should be able to dash. The clan leader won't be bothered to break his isolation just to tend to a maid, not even of the bloodline. The blue-haired woman made to say something before he interrupted. He would not lose her, anybody but her. He won't lose that one person he had grown to finally care for once more. He will, he stated with certainty. His soft voice broke into the conversation. They both stared at him, so he continued. The Sharingan was blazing in an uncontrolled spin and his voice cracked this time. He could not say what it was that caused it. Anger? Sadness? Joy? Fear? He was uncertain. He had gone through more emotions today alone than he had in the past 2 years. I will make him, he said with the certainty of a man who knew the sun would rise every day. The blue-haired woman gave him a smile that, for some reason, he could tell was more genuine. The sound of sirens in the background broke the moment as the driver made a decision, sweeping him off his feet and moving swiftly to their car, which looked remarkably untouched despite the destruction that surrounded them. He barely glanced at the ashes that were all that remained of the curse before he was deposited in the back seat, and the blue-haired woman followed him in. The drive back to the compound was a blur. The driver rode like a man possessed, swapping lanes and breaking speed limits that he knew for certain would have consequences. Yet he couldn't bring himself to care, not when Aiko's head rested on his lap and grew colder with every passing second. Their arrival at the clan gates was announced with a kick that blew off the car door. The blue-haired woman took Aiko out and marched up the stairs into the compound, with him and the driver following behind. The driver made to carry him once more, but he refused, instead staggering beside him. Formally dressed clan members walked by and stared with varying degrees of surprise and sadness. It must not be a new scene. People walking into the clan compound hurt and broken from the monsters they went to hunt and rid the world of. A couple stepped in to help as they headed towards the manor in the middle of the clan, only to find a white-haired teenager standing at the door. Startling bright blue eyes stared at him, and out of reflex, he sent the minuscule cursed energy he had left into his own eyes. The flinch he got as a response was unexpected, and the bright smile that followed after was even more so. The teen made to speak before the door suddenly swung open behind him. He shut his mouth with a reluctant frown and an exaggerated pout before stepping aside. He knew who he was even without a word spoken between them. Gojo Satoru. Clan heir, sole inheritor of the clan Dojutsu, an all-round prodigy. He walked past him and stepped into the building as fast as his broken body would let him. This time there was none of the ceremony and fascination that surrounded his first visit. The moment he stumbled into the room, he immediately collapsed on the futon spread out opposite the old man. Blazing, swirling Sharingan set in an exhausted face clashed with neutral eyes set in a face that might as well be formed from granite. "Heal her," he gasped out. His tone was commanding, certain, sure, pleading. "You're hurt for someone that went to peer at the outside world," the monotone voice replied while his eyes stayed stuck on his red spinning ones. "I'm not the one bleeding out and dying right this moment, old man," he let out in a grunt so against his nature, so unfamiliar to him, he nearly recoiled back. The old man said nothing and stared at him. He was about to crack before he finally spoke. "So are you," he continued after an uncomfortable silence, "yet you somehow managed to use your cursed energy to brace yourself in an act of curse energy manipulation I would never have expected from a child of 6, and I don't need the 6 eyes to see that." This time a raised eyebrow broke the uncaring facade. "I can't lose her," he whispered out. "That is no reason why I should bother with a mundane instead of focusing on you." The serenity in his words and his lack of hurriedness almost brought him to anger once more, but this time he held his emotions in check. Despite what he looked like, he was not a child. He was not prone to emotional outbursts even in his past life as a child, so something else must be fraying his nerves, causing him to lash out. Cutting the flow of cursed energy to his eyes and reducing his usage to nearly nothing, he stared at the clan head in silence. The words could not form. What reason could he give a sorcerer at the pinnacle of the world to bother with a mundane woman that he cared nothing for? The old man knew nothing of her radiant smiles or her boisterous personality. He knew not of the way she made sure to check up on him twice a night to make sure he was okay. How she always sneaked in sweets for him during his lunches after she discovered his sweet tooth. No, an appeal to emotions won't work here. The clan head was not necessarily wicked or cruel. He was just unfeeling toward the mundane. How many dead and dying people had he seen? Why should he care about one more? What was one more death of a mundane made to the hundreds of people that died every day? He knew the kind of experience that led to that thought process. He was intimately familiar with it. Yet he could not accept it here. Not when he finally found a reason to be happy. His nails dug deep grooves in his thighs as he looked at the clan head. His resolve solidified. He knew what it would come down to despite his efforts to convince himself otherwise. He was ready to sell his life once more. Ready to put everything on the line on the altar of sacrifice just for the opportunity of seeing a loved one spared a terrible fate. The old man saw the resolve in his steel-gray eyes and gave a sharp smile. He was asked a question that they both knew had only a single answer. "Do you want to be a sorcerer?" The kid is a monster in the making. He observed with a big grin while he spectated his little cousin fight from 500 feet up. A borderline relentless machine in combat. A kidney shot landed on the instructor like a cannon. A kick to the side of the knee had the black-haired man stumble out of his guard. He watched as the little figure pirouetted on his feet and slammed a small fist into his instructor hard enough and with enough reinforcement to blow the man backward. The middle-aged man clad in a traditional-style kimono flipped and landed on his feet, only to look up and see a kick whipping towards his face. He raised a guard fast enough to stop it, but the little monster pivoted with the aid of the arm he used to block to unleash another kick midair that sneaked past the instructor's guard and went for his head. The instructor tucked his head and raised a shoulder up in time to suffer a dislocation instead of a fractured skull. Using the single grip on his leg, the instructor spun on his feet before slamming the kid on the floor, hard enough to crack the solid slab of stone they fought on. The follow-up foot slam was dodged as the kid instinctively rolled to the right to dodge a blow that cratered what was left of the floor of the arena. It was little things like that that tripped him up. That made the clan head hide in the shadows of the building to spectate the fight of a 7-year-old child. That forced the old monsters of the GOJO clan to monitor the fight. That made the other big clans send spies just for the sake of the child. The mutated 6 eyes that the clan had grown obsessed with over the past year. While its perception was not on the scale of the 6 eyes, it had proven to be more versatile. Case in point, the predictive ability he seemed to display at odd moments. Jiki flipped to his feet and dodged a haymaker that was aimed at his head before it was even made. Spinning to the back of the instructor in one fluid movement, he buried his elbow just below the rib cage, fracturing already sore ribs before slamming his foot into the back of the instructor and using the force of the attack to flip further back. Another thing about the kid was the sheer speed he displayed and what Satoru had taken to calling killer instinct. At this age, other clan kids were still being taught how to actually hit an opponent. Where other people hesitated or flinched unconsciously. The kid never did. He skipped that part of hand-to-hand training and moved straight to combat. The predictive abilities of his eyes, coupled with his speed, made him hit hard and fast. Which was fortunate because for all his skill in cursed energy reinforcement, you can't reinforce a glass cup to be as durable as a diamond. He took the few hits that managed to get past his defense stoically and made sure to reply to them with a vengeance. The 3 black tomo in his red eyes spun slowly as he sank into a crouch, his body shaking from the effort it took to sustain such reinforcement and the toll of the fight. In the eyes of the 15 visible clan members watching the fight, the kid must have seemed as tranquil as the seas themselves. But the 6 eyes laid bare the truth. The kid could not continue any further, yet the clan leader didn't call it to a halt. Despite his hands gripping each other behind his back tightly enough to crush granite. His face was a mask of aloofness. He had still not figured out the clan leader's love for the kid. Most people couldn't tell. He hid it well enough with the way he seemed to ignore the kid before he opened his eyes. The way he pushed him into such grueling training even as a child must have seemed callous to most. Coupled with the choice he gave him in order to save his maid. But Satoru knew better. Satoru saw better. A scared maid stood to the side. He knew her. At least he was familiar enough with her over the past 6 months to say so. Her trembling was more obvious, as was the fear and worry in her eyes. In the half-aborted movements to Jiki she made whenever he was hit. Yet she was even more powerless. To change anything. To do anything. The only reason she was even allowed this deep into the clan compound was because of Gigi. On her own, she was powerless. He stood above them all and contemplated the concept of power. On one side stood a man with enough power to end it, yet he could not for duty shackled him. On another side was a woman with no power to truly do anything or change anything. What was life without the power to live it how you want? And what was the use of power if it couldn't be applied however one wanted? Satoru wanted to be free. Free of his clan. Free of the pesky higher-ups. Free to truly do whatever he wanted. It was one of the reasons he aimed to be the strongest. Yet what use was the title of strongest if he couldn't even do what he wanted? It was at this moment he came to a conclusion that would make him a menace to the higher-ups in the Jujutsu society for years to come. If he was to be the strongest, then he was going to take advantage of that title. If the old man wasn't going to do anything, well, with a clasp of his hand, he flexes his cursed energy in a variation of his curse technique, blue, to eliminate the distance between himself and the kid. He appears beside the kid without a sound, yet the brat lashes out with a sloppy kick at his side. Nothing like his precise attacks from minutes ago. His foot stops an inch away from his spleen due to his application of Limitless and he grabs the kid by the scruff of his shirt, holding him up. This has gone on for long enough. With a wide grin on his face, he teleports once more, appearing beside the maid before grabbing her by her waist. "I'm taking my cousin on a vacation. See you guys later." He laughs at the shocked looks on the clan members watching the fight, the frown on the face of the old monsters in the shadows, and the inconspicuous smile on the clan head's face. Before he teleports once more. Tatsumi POV. He walked out of the shadows leisurely, ignoring the surprised greetings and bows from the members that saw him. A quick hand sign sent his fellow hidden spectators ahead of him. Satoru's entrance still had them agitated, but he expected it. Anticipated it, in fact. After all, he would have been senile if he couldn't sense his own grandson's cursed energy from a paltry 500 feet up. It has been 6 months since the appearance of the eye that the clan has taken to call the Sharingan. A mutated replica of the 6 eyes. 6 months since the other clans had been trying to know more about the boy. Walking down the paved road to his manor, he considered the eye. 3 black tomo in a sea of red. There had been mentions of another form, the form that brought about the black flames. That burned a semi-grade 1 cursed spirit to nothing in seconds. Yet the boy had refused to show them once more, citing blindness from overuse of the technique. How he knew about the blindness was not certain, but they had concluded it was instinctual. In the same way, most people used cursed techniques. His musings ended as he got into his manor. Taking a side door, he traveled down a rarely used hidden stairway to end up in a chamber deep beneath the clan grounds. The chamber was barely lit, with shadows that seemed to move the more you looked. There were 7 seats in a circle, carved of the bedrock that surrounded them. 6 were already occupied, leaving the 7th one in the middle for him. He claimed it with a lazy stride, sitting in a leisurely posture with his face resting in his palm. His second palm tapped his armrest lightly, and that was the cue to start. He's progressing fast. An elder cloaked in a yellow yukata started, faster than Satoru, and even better mannered, said another voice. The statement brought silence to the chamber. He knew it would come up. For all of Satoru's obvious power. He was a hard person for the elders that rigidly held on to the old traditions to like. Even more so when he started testing the rules. Tugging at his leash like a dog seeking to know how far they would let him. Unfortunately for them, the length of the leash was way longer than they liked. The teen was bound to be the next clan head with those eyes of his. A calm alternative must have been heaven sent for the more traditional members of the clan. The Zenin clan sent another envoy to talk about hunting territories. He disappeared during the recess and was caught creeping towards Jiki's house by Satoru, another voice stated in an attempt to move the meeting on. He let out an unnoticed sigh and wondered how long the meeting would last after the conversation restarted once more. He had a painting that had not yet been unwrapped in his bedroom waiting for him. Satoru POV. So what do you do for fun, brat? The kid briefly glanced at him before replying and staring back at a couple taking pictures beside a billboard. Painting, the kid said with a soft voice. The contrast between both of them was ridiculous and uncanny. For all their similarities in features, their attitude and mannerism couldn't be further apart. He removed his glasses and stared at the sky in mirth with the back of his palm on his forehead. Was this how people saw him? His wide grin was straining at this point. They were in a park in the middle of Tokyo. He held a soda in his other hand while Jiki sipped from his cup of tea with his 2 hands in a traditional manner, while the scarred maid stood behind him and observed their interaction with a smile. They had continued the original exploration that was planned for him over 6 months ago. This time it was free of curses. The location of the maid near death was avoided and ignored, and they ended up here as the day got darker. The passage of cars, technology, and the clothes people wore seemed to hold the kid's interest more than he did. They had been at it for hours now, him asking questions. Questions that were answered with single words. Do you see 360? He was shocked and quiet for a moment. Not because of the question in itself. After all, it was an easy one and one that had been noted down already. This was the first initiative the kid had taken all day. Pale gray eyes stared into his eerie blue. There was no fear, disgust, or inferiority in those eyes while they stared into his. He reminded him almost of Geto at that moment. Even the clan head had some level of greed when he looked him in the eye. Yet there was none from Jiki. He sat back up. Are we talking about our eyes now? His renewed interest in the conversation was replied to with a shrug that had the kid staring at people again. He was about to lose him. With an exaggerated sigh, he finally replied, Yes, sure, when my eyes are active. Do you have a blind spot at the back of your neck? Your thoracic vertebrae, to be exact. The question was not one he had gotten before, which made him actually activate his eyes to be sure. A shake of his head had the kid in an obvious thinking posture. What do you live for, Satoru-san? He raised a well-manicured brow in surprise at the rapid change of topic. I've heard of your goal to be the most powerful sorcerer in the world. With those eyes, it's more possible than not. Black and red eyes stared into eerie blue. But power for the sake of power. He looked at the kid again and had to reassess him. He had always seemed more mature for his age. Yet he was not the first genius. Satoru had been like him once. Genius, aloof, quiet and withdrawn. Yet never this philosophical. With a soft frown, he looked back at the kid and wondered how different things would have been if they were born together. They could have changed the world by now. Look around you, he gesticulated to the gathered people walking around. What do you think most of Jujutsu society think of them? The kid's reply was a frown. He had not expected a reply anyway. It was a rhetorical question. Subhuman. He spat out the word with annoyance and disgust. Simply because of lack of power. A lack of ability. With a soft shake of his head, he continued, they forget that compared to people like me. Like you, they are the same. Yet that is not my biggest grudge with the society. It's the corruption. The very foundation of the Jujutsu society is flawed. You asked why I wanted to be the strongest? It is to have the power to make change and affect it. Single-handedly if I have to. He finished his rant with a deep breath. He had never expected to have this conversation, let alone with a kid. When he looked back at Jiki, he noticed a soft smile on his face and his eyes had reverted back to their dull gray. I've seen the consequences of unchecked power, Satoru-san, yet considering your motivations, I don't think you'll go down that road. Those words gave him more comfort than he had to admit. He was 6.5 when he got a ludicrous gift. His pale gray eyes went from the black eye wrap in his hands to the grinning face of Satoru. You're aware of the fact that I can't see past this, yes? His white-haired cousin's smile only got wilder. Before pointing a thumb at his own eye wrap. Come on, brat, try it on. We might discover a new part of your dojutsu. He gave a heavy sigh and tried his best to ignore the soft laugh Aiko let out behind him. If only he was born with the Byakugan. Then maybe, just maybe, he could have given his whimsical cousin what he desired. Recalling old texts he had read from even older Uchiha outposts during his days as a missing nin. The obscure texts gave vague descriptions of a progenitor of both eyes, giving the Uchiha and Hyuga a shared ancestry. Come on, kid, try it on. With another sigh, he gently wrapped it around his eyes before sending a minuscule amount of cursed energy to his ears and nose. His attempts at forming rudimentary cursed energy pulses in a bastardized version of what chakra sensors did had hit a stalemate at just a meter away from him. The solution to the particular problem eluded him, for now. Yet even without his sight and complete chakra pulse, he knew his cousin's grin must have gotten bigger. The things he did for his family. Ghetto POV. Cursed spirits were like maggots. Slippery and always at the edges of your vision. Willfully ignored by the mundane till it was impossible for them to. He walked down an alley filled with a heavy tang of excessively spilled blood. The splashes on the walls of the too slim alley painted a grotesque picture that he felt oddly at home in. The hungry gnawing of teeth tearing through supple flesh in the dark was like a buzzsaw at a mill, but like everything that had to do with curses, mundanes were oblivious to it as they walked past the alley. Their disbelief is a shield. Their lack of knowledge is an armor. His steps were unfortunately louder than he intended, as he was stuck within his thoughts. A mistake that he would not abide a second time. The multi-limbed monstrosity snapped its neck back in a maneuver that would have killed any living thing before letting out a screech that would have forced lesser men to run. He stared at it with boredom on his face as it jumped from the corpse it was feeding on, hopping from wall to wall. In the tight confines of the alley, he won't be able to summon his preferred curses. But against this juvenile, he doubted he'd need them. He let out a disgusted sigh at himself. What should have been an easy task was about to be dragged out. The cursed spirit must have sensed something because it suddenly jumped even higher and disappeared above the alley. Yet he knew it was not gone yet. Just waiting. He had been hunting cursed spirits since he was 10. The only thing more alluring to cursed spirits than special grace cursed objects were jujutsu sorcerers. The rabid desire to increase their cursed energy and metamorphose into something greater than their ilk was like a hunger in them. An intense, unquenchable thirst only matched by their hatred. Most jujutsu sorcerers had a rudimentary way of sensing cursed energy. It was mostly vague and could not accurately be trusted, especially in places where death or blood had been shed in copious amounts. It interfered with the ability to pinpoint others' cursed energy. So he waited, in the middle of the alley. Patience trained from years scouting cursed spirits. Stilling his outward motions, while his muscles were coiled beneath his baggy blue jujutsu high school uniform. A shift from above, the subtle clack of claws on brick behind him, and his nerves fired. He spun on his feet with an arm outstretched and repeated a mantra he has hated since he realized his curse technique. Exorcise. Absorb. The lunging cursed spirits deconstructed before him. Its fanged maw set in a featureless face screeched at him with its hands outstretched as a bubble of blue cursed energy deconstructed and forced it into a small orb before dropping on his palm. He looked at the orb in disgust. The condensed essence of a cursed being. A putrid blue that seemed to infect everything around it. He shoved it into his mouth, ignoring the familiar taste of a dirty rag used to clean up shit and vomit. It scraped past his tongue and blissfully went down his gullet. He held the wall as he forced himself to stop the urge to vomit that viciously rose up. But this was not the first. It was hardly even the worst. Wiping the side of his mouth, he stood up straight. For all his hatred for his curse technique, it was what made him stand shoulder to shoulder with Satoru, the strength he wielded. A phone call drew his attention away from the desecrated body a few meters behind him. He tucked his hand into his pocket before flipping the phone to his ear. Geto here. Ah, Geto-san, you've been assigned to a scouting job. 2 sorcerers have been missing for the past 2 days, Yutaheim-san and Mei-san. He raised an eyebrow at that. Yutaheim was a second grader and not a particularly strong one in his books. But Mei was no slouch. A first-grade sorcerer with the ability and experience to back it up. The man on the phone continued. Your team is being dispatched. Meet us at Hamamatsu District. The old manor in the forest. Yeri-san would be with me. But I've called Satoru-san and he has promised to be there. Grunting an affirmation at the overly formal handler, he shut the phone and started heading to the bus station, hands in his pockets and back in a lazy slouch. Hamamatsu should be a stop away. Maybe this time he would get there before Satoru. The thought brought a soft smile to his face. 30 minutes later and he was walking up a broken cobblestone path that led deep into the forest. His cursed spirits had scouted ahead and informed him that there were only 2 people present. As well as a massive manor that radiated so much cursed energy he felt it from this far off. Bypassing the broken gate and getting to the front of the mansion, he was greeted by the presence of the glasses-wearing, corporate-dressed handler, who gave a short bow and a lazy glance and wave from Shoko, who stayed stuck on her phone typing. Giving his own lazy wave back, he asked after a brief glance around for Satoru. He's not here yet, is he? He directed the question at Shoko, yet the handler replied. Gojo-san informed me he would be a little late, as he was already preoccupied before I called. The reply drew a crease on his brow. A familiar soft sound of displaced air draws his attention and ends what he is about to say. Shoko and the handler remained oblivious to what happened. But he knew. He was familiar enough with Satoru's means of transportation to know he had arrived. What confused him was the number of steps that came up the stairs. The confusion deepened when he saw 2 Satorus climb up the stairs, and for a moment he considered if he made a mistake swallowing that particular cursed spirit before he realized the second person was way shorter than Satoru. The white-haired kid had his hair tied up in a bun similar to his with a few strands falling to the side of his face, while a black wrap covered his eyes. He wore a long-sleeved black sweatshirt with matching colored shorts as well as a pair of brown Geta sandals. Satoru had a wide grin on his face as they all stared at the duo in surprise and confusion. What the hell? Was Shoko's eloquent opening. Her tired eyes finally left her phone to stare at the white-haired duo. When did the bastard multiply? Satoru's only reply was to grin even wider, with a hand on the kid's head. This is the new and improved Satoru 2.0. You all should say your hellos. The kid let out a sigh before shaking Gojo's hand off and smoothly transitioning into a formal bow. My name is Gojo Jiki, nice to meet you. At the mention of his name, he could see the tumblers click in Shoko's and the handlers' heads. He had heard of the kid too, of course. For the title of once-in-a-lifetime genius, the GOJOs seemed to breed them like rabbits. His rumored mutated 6 eyes were supposed to be the icing on the cake. Shoko pocketed her phone and walked up to the kid, introducing herself with a smile. "I'm Shoko Larry, nice to meet you," she offered with a handshake, which the kid took with a soft smile of his own. "Not to break up the moment, but we've 2 sorcerers missing and presumably dead in that scary manner over here." He ignored Shoko's glare and the whispered trash that accompanied it and focused on the kid who turned his head to face him. He had heard the kid's eyes were different from the 6 eyes. So how the hell did he manage to maneuver so easily with his eyes blindfolded? "Mao Mao, leave it to you to spoil all my fun." Satoru walked forward and stretched. "Let me give you a peek behind a real technique, Jiki-kun." He turned his head behind him as he spoke, before focusing on the building once more. The glow of his eyes gave him an idea of what he was about to do. It wasn't exactly a technique. More of a subtle application of Satoru's limitless. With a hand sign, he formed a blue sphere above the building. A second later he could feel the building shudder and tremor as old rain-beaten planks, windows, and bricks were broken apart and sucked up by a sudden gravitational force. The demolition of the building was fast. With the destruction of its barrier, the cursed spirit would be forced to face them in direct combat. He took a step back and prepared for the creation of a portal. The broken building stayed mid-air for a second before dropping along with a screaming occupant. Yudaheim. He considered the drop and the angle of her fall and deemed it an acceptable outcome. Moving to arrest her fall would leave him unable to act when the curse finally made its move. Shoko and the handler would not be fast enough to catch her. He didn't factor in the little white-haired missile that blurred past him fast enough to almost trigger his reflexive summoning of a special-grade curse. JIKI-POV. He had not expected to do much today. It was one of his rare rest days when he finger-painted with Aiko as his muse and assistant. But they had gone from preparing his paint to licking ice cream on the streets of Tokyo, where he had spent the past couple of hours reacquainting himself with how to maneuver without sight, to teleporting to a haunted house. When the call came in, he had requested to join. It felt like the perfect time to see actual jujutsu sorcery at work. Satoru was all too happy to comply, gladly talking about his teammates. Shoko and Geto. Shoko distinctly reminded him of a teammate he had during his ANBU days. But her technique, while important, was not something that interested him much. Geto's curse manipulation, on the other hand. Their introduction was quick and to the point, especially when the person he guessed was Geto from his voice, highlighting the fact that they were here to save people. Then there was Satoru's subsequent destruction of the house and the scream that drew his attention. He moved. Instinctively. Cursed energy-enhanced muscles sent him blitzing past Geto and the still-shocked Shoko. The speed at which he moved loosened his eye wrap and he activated his Sharingan with barely any thought. A leap left the cobblestone cracked and sent him soaring into the air. Flipping mid-air, he landed in a crouch on a falling part of the wall that held pictures of an old couple holding each other. With his Sharingan doing the heavy work of calculating the angles of the falling building, he jumped off his perch, twisting mid-air in a feat to match any trained acrobat. He avoided debris mid-fall and skipped off bricks barely bigger than a palm before catching the much larger woman in a bridal carry. The fall was easier and he angled for the area where he calculated the least amount of debris to fall. His reinforced feet slammed hard into the ground as he tucked his knee and braced like stone as wooden frames and a huge slab of the wall fell around him, his position on the ground the sole exception. He had barely taken in the surprise and growing red blush on the woman's face with his single revealed eye before he felt the ground shake beneath him. A mud-colored hand broke out of the ground, pulling up its full body from beneath the earth. The accompanying roar from the curse's lipless maw sent his hair blasting back. He could feel his eye reacting to the new threat. The 3 tomo shifted and reformed into his Mangekyo. A reflexive Amaterasu was halfway formed before an even greater monstrosity ripped the earth apart from beneath the monster. A white and green maggot-like curse that bit it in half. A hand on his shoulder stopped him from burning the 2 monsters to nothing. I'm not sure Geto would like you burning his pet all that much. Accepting Satoru's warning for what it was, he turned his head to look at Geto. So this was curse manipulation. The earring-wearing teen looked at him with a raised brow and his body instinctively set in a stance. He had noticed the spinning of his Mangekyo had that effect on people. Didn't think I'd be seeing you again so soon, kid. The familiar voice sent his eyes to a particular rubble where a familiar beautiful blue-haired woman sat with a soft smile on her face, as well as an umbrella that covered her head. Mei-san, following the aftermath of the past day and the standing invitation from Mei to come visit, Jiki followed his cousin and his classmates back to Jujutsu High, which led to where he was now. With his awareness and Sharingan, he finally had greater control over the immense cursed energy that seemed to rage just beneath his skin, opening doors he had feared locked since his arrival. For all his prodigious talent in the shinobi arts, where he truly flourished was in the use of genjutsu, imposing your own reality of the world upon others, with both brute force and guile. His Manji-iko established that with the formation of his Tsukuyomi. Yet where genjutsu took as much effort as breathing for him in his past life, in this new world he had to fight tooth and nail for every inch of progress. His problem boiled down to one thing. Cursed energy. Heated voices drew his eyes down to the court. He observed the white and black-haired duo as they argued their varying points about the weak, the strong, and their place in society on the basketball court from the stands while Shoko braided his hair from behind him. He understood Geto's point about looking out for the weak. After all, he had slaughtered his clan to protect the hidden leaf. Ninshu was created to protect and understand each other before it was corrupted into ninjutsu. Yet he also understood where Satoru was coming from. Why should the strong be forced with the responsibility of protecting the weak? Why give yourself an obvious shackle and handicap? With a shrug, he ignored the brewing argument and went back to his contemplations and experiment. Genjutsu was applied by sending chakra through one of the five senses and then hijacking the nervous system with the aid of the chakra pathways that sent chakra through the body. The Uchiha focused on visual genjutsu as a result of their blessed eyes. Yet unlike his clansmen, Itachi had a broader view of genjutsu. He was proficient in the usage of all five senses to entrap a target. Yet even he could not claim to be unbiased. The Sharingan made a difficult task borderline simple. Sending chakra through the opponent's eyes with the aid of the Sharingan was as easy as breathing and as subtle as a fish moving through water. In the elemental nations, shinobi knew that crossing eyes with an Uchiha was enough reason to try and flush out their chakra systems. The really good ones did it in a second, but for most, they never even had the chance to make an attempt. In this new world, genjutsu was not a known art, yet it was even harder to apply it. This was simply due to the nature of cursed energy itself. Where chakra flowed in stable pathways that made ninjutsu and genjutsu easy to apply and manipulate, cursed energy was volatile and arbitrary. As an energy source that came from negative emotions, it was capricious in its flow. The instability of cursed energy acted as a constant flush. Therefore, any cursed energy sent into another was disrupted by the opponent's cursed energy in a second. His contemplation was broken by the gym door sliding open, introducing the broad features of the principle of Jujutsu High. His frown berated the teenagers and forced them to cringe before he even said a word. "How long are you going to keep fooling around, you brats? And where is Shoko?" "Hiya," was Shoko's unenthusiastic response, along with a wave. The broad-shouldered Mun sent brown eyes up to the stands, which widened in surprise as they met his spinning black and red. "Jiki-kun, I was not aware you were present." He sent an accusing finger at Satoru, which led the man's attention back to his wayward student. "You're aware that this is a high school, are you not, Satoru?" Satoru turned his head to the side and scratched it with an abashed expression on his face. With a heavy sigh, the principal continued, "Be that as it may, the higher-ups have assigned the two of you on a mission. A direct request from Tenjin-sama." With a side glance at Shoko, he added in a softer voice, "Yet I don't think anything stops Shoko from joining you." "I'm sure they can handle it," she said with a wave while standing up. "Someone has to be responsible for the kid while Satoru is away." With a heavy shrug, he turned around and continued, "Come with me then, Satoru, Geto. We've more to talk about." With a quick wave, Satoru and Geto quickly put on their blue shirt jackets and followed him out. "Come on then, Jiki, let me introduce you to Nanami-san." He stood up in one smooth movement and followed behind her. He had an idea of how to go about working with genjutsu. All that remained was actually applying it. As for Satoru and Geto, they were strong, so he had no reason to worry about whatever clandestine mission the higher-ups had planned for them. "According to your instructors, you've been progressing fast." The old man sat with legs folded in a meditation pose in his dim cavern and faced him with his eyes closed. He gave a single nod of affirmation before the old man continued. "And yet we still don't know what your innate technique is." Opening his eyes to stare at Jiki with a placid and uncaring look, he continued, For all your immense talent, blessed eyes, and potential, you're not complete till you've acquired your innate technique. He sat quietly and thought about his recent problem. His innate technique. He should have unlocked it by now, and yet he was still seen to be lacking. You would say it to his face, and none other than the elders would acknowledge it. Yet, it gave reason for dissent among clan members who didn't like the apparent favoritism shown to him. He was not oblivious to the clan politics being played. He was aware of the two sides of the conflict, yet he was loath to play that game with them. He had played it once, and what did it bring him other than loss, misery, and regret? I'm aware, he let out in his soft voice. I feel I'm somewhat close to it, clan head. It should not be an issue for long. I won't disappoint you. I know you won't, child, he agreed before standing up and walking to the edge of the room where a pot of tea and its accompanying cups lay, with the obligatory scolding done with. He walked back to him with a tray of tea and biscuits. Tell me, how goes your painting of the sunset from the top of Mount Takao? The old man said with a soft smile. Letting out his own smile for the first time that day, he shifted from his more formal size of position to a cross-leg position and started talking about one of the few things that really drew his interest in this new world while he took a cup of tea from the old man I found the perfect color of blue for. The moment Shoko called him and said that Satoru and Geto were set to return and requested his aid in throwing a surprise welcome-back party, he contacted Aiko and requested a trip to Jujutsu High. He didn't have anything to do for the day. He was homeschooled in preparation for his Jujutsu High acceptance, and with his intellect, learning the advanced science had not been difficult, although he had no interest in furthering it. He had proved to his instructors he would have no reason to continue under their tutelage, thereby freeing up his schedule greatly. He had even heard whispers of him enrolling into Jujutsu High early, yet that was all they were, rumors. Their drive ended at the bottom of the long stairs that led to Jujutsu High. Aiko stepped out from the passenger seat and opened his door. He stepped out and with a parting nod at the driver he turned around and started climbing, hand in hand with Aiko to her secret delight. By the time they had gotten to the top of the stairs, there were drops of sweat on his face. He cursed his infantile legs as they finally passed through the red gates of Jujutsu High. He felt the slimy feel of a barrier as he stepped past the gate. It was a feeling he was not sure he was ever going to get used to. His eyes saw the threads of cursed energy that reinforced the barrier and led further into the earth, Tungen-sama's work. He had not officially met the oldest Jujutsu sorcerer yet, and he was not in a hurry to meet him. The Mun had lived for over 500 years. What was a couple more to him? Yet he had heard enough. Enough to know that he was the pillar that upheld the secrecy of Jujutsu and curses. Shoko met them at the gate, rounding up her texting before flipping the phone and walking towards them. Beside her were the opposing frowning and smiling visages of Kento Nanami and Hibari Yu. They're almost here, Shoko started as she walked closer to them. With a quick ruffle of his hair, she led them deeper into the school and to the gym. He was on the ladder hanging balloons over the gym door when the sound and an accompanying flare of cursed energy hit. A loud boom that sent shockwaves as far back as the gym. An attack inside the school? Was his first thought. Impossible. He dropped to the floor as he felt even more cursed energy fluctuate, a cursed energy he was familiar with. He didn't even need to exercise his rudimentary sensor abilities to tell the owner. Satoru. To his surprise, Nanami was already halfway through the door by the time he landed. He had underestimated the blonde-haired teen. He had not let the shock of the incident faze him while Hibara and Shoko were still frozen in surprise. Pushing them out of his mind, he was only a step behind Nanami. With cursed energy reinforcement, he blurred past him. His smaller physique lent him more maneuverability. His immense pool of cursed energy and his precise manipulation granted him a boost in speed that left Nanami as an indistinct visage behind him. Satoru was hurt. He could feel it in the way his cursed energy recoiled and fluctuated, and yet he was still fighting. Fighting something that his senses could not pick up. He was barely a minute away from Satoru when he felt his cursed energy disappear. Impossible. Satoru was the strongest. With a reinforced leap, he vaulted over the manor that covered his sight from the last location where he felt Satoru's cursed energy. Dissolution. That was all his eyes could see. The area was a mess of debris, blood, and a body. Where lines of houses once stood, now there was nothing but rubble, with an elevated platform that held up a body. A body surrounded by fly heads. Common cursed spirits that were no danger of their own. So why was a body beneath them? A body that his eyes told him was still, with a perforated heart buried in a torso bearing a large gash that had torn past the pectoral muscles, ripping aside layers of muscle, fat, and bone to split a torso in two. A body that had a gaping stab wound in the weak side at the top of the skull. A body that his rudimentary sensor abilities told him was leaking cursed energy while some amount of cursed energy lingered. A dead body, he had to admit after trying to deny the inevitable for so long. A dead body that looked so much like him. A hoarse voice called out a name as he stared at the body. Satoru. A hitched breath and an aborted movement to grasp at his cousin was all he remembered as he stared at the body for longer than he knew was wise, especially when the killer was still out there. Red eyes imprinted the image of white hair soaked in blood into his brain. The original shock had swiftly turned to horror, and horror to rage, rage to wrath, and wrath to cold apathy. He would have had time to grieve. That time was not now. Detaching and suppressing his emotions behind the doors he learned to form during his time in Black Ops. He analyzed the bleeding form on the ground. A loud explosion of sound and pressure shook the earth and drew his attention from Satoru for what felt like the first time in days. The continuous explosions and vibrations forced him to tear his eyes from the body and turn towards the inner parts of the school. With a stomp of his feet, he moved, leaving the body behind for Nanami and whoever came after to deal with. Geto's cursed energy acted as a beacon to his location. A location he knew his cousin's killer was present in. He had blood to reap. He's too late to stop the first swing of the sword. He could only watch. His eyes caught the blur of steel as it cleaved through Geto's chest at insane speed. The splash of blood covers his attacker's view for a split second, yet he swings the blade a second time, knowing the perfect angle to cut and eviscerate him. He's not too late this time. He bursts into the falling corridor and stomps on the falling blade, a katana, he notes, with his left leg, diverting it and forcing it into the wooden floor. With a twist of his hips, he spins and slams his right shin into the surprised man's face, hard enough to crack his skull and pulp his brain, sending him rocketing back out of the falling corridor and into the ruin that used to be the tombs of the Sky Corridor. With one swift movement, he picks up Geto and leaps out. Landing a few meters away from the collapsing structure. What is this? The little monster is present too. Waving off dust, the muscular man walks out of a hole in the building he was buried in, cracking his neck as he eyes him up. He scrutinizes his cousin's killer with cold, empty eyes. Black hair and eyes, a scar at the lip, approximately 6 foot tall with a physique that screamed unbridled strength. Durable enough to take a hit without flinching. No cursed energy emission or residual. Feet are spread out in a casual way that seems languid. He remembers the speed that almost bisected Geto into two. The resilience that allowed him to survive a reinforced kick to the head and a trip through multiple buildings without a scratch comes to a conclusion. Close combat against him would be suboptimal. A glance back at Geto's bleeding form reinforces that fact. Yet he didn't have a choice. A quiet one? Or does that have something to do with the dead body of your cousin you passed? Hate-blazing red eyes met placid black set in a face with a sharp smile that was all teeth. He sent his cursed energy through them. Few genjutsu were as good as the one in his right eye. And he had enough hate to fuel this with sheer brute force. Tsukuyami, he felt his eye split and morph into its Mangekyo form. Visceral illusions at the tip of his tongue. The cursed energy slipped into the mun, and when it found nothing to hang on to, it leaked back out of the mun faster than it slipped in. No cursed energy instead of absolute control? How? He accepts the impossibility of the situation, adapts and moves on, still looking for a weakness to exploit. With a step forward, the mun continued, unaware of how easily this fight could have ended. I'm not here for you, brat. Move aside. You killed him, didn't you? He didn't realize he had spoken till the mun gave him a surprised look. It had not sounded like his voice. That tone, devoid of all inflection. When last had he been heavy with such anger that he was forced to shut down his emotional responses? Shizuya's death. Revenge then, the surprise transitioned into amusement. Valid as any reason, I guess. With a shrug, the mun moved. He was forced to admit he had underestimated the scarred man's speed. With a blink of his eyes, his vision was covered by a forearm. Fortunately, the mun had also underestimated his eyes. The Sharingan predicted an opponent's movement by reading the flow of chakra/cursed energy and the subtle twitches in muscles and body language. The man's lack of cursed energy made it harder to predict his movements, but not impossible. He saw the lariat coming, but even with his vaunted speed and reinforcement, It took all he had to dive beneath the outstretched forearm. Rolling to his feet, he spun and unleashed a left hook into his opponent's back, but the Mun had stopped his own momentum with a disgustingly powerful feat of strength and resilience. Slamming his feet hard enough into the ground to crater it, he twisted his hips and lashed out with a kick of his own. The two attacks hit simultaneously. Where his blow sent the scared man staggering a step back, the kick sent him flying back in an ironic reversal of what happened barely a minute ago. Idly noting the bruised rib, he flips midair and lands, then lashes out with an instinctive kick that forces the Mun to block in surprise. He had gotten too close too fast. This close, he moves into his opponent's guard, burying two cursed energy-enhanced blows into his left kidney before sending a knee strike at his groin. The Mun takes the hit stoically with a grin before using well-muscled thighs to block his knee. Transitioning into another style that was better suited for how close they were, the Mun sent an elbow at his head. He raised his forearms to block, ready to bear the attack, before it hit him like one of Lady Tsunade's blows. But this time it sends him skidding backwards toward the remains of the corridor, where a sword hilt stuck out of a wooden floorboard with heavily bruised and fractured forearms. The strength of the first attack was not a fluke. The Mun is slower to react, as he expected him to go flying, but he had learned from the first attack. This time he sent cursed energy into the ground to anchor himself. Blocking another attack like that would render him useless. He idly takes note of his shaking hands. He forces his hands to stop. Pain is an illusion, locking it up in that deep hole in his psyche. He would have had time to feel it. After he left his opponent choking on his own blood. His attacks had enlightened him on the sheer resilience of the man's physique. Since hand-to-hand is out, he reaches out and grasps hold of the hilt, drawing the sword and holding it two-handed. He goes through the hundreds of sword forms in his head and finally settles on one. His left shoulder was ahead, blocking the view of the sword, his stance low and his lead foot bent while the back foot was outstretched. Sending his cursed energy into the sword, he releases a heavy breath and settles into the stance. Dance of the Mad Four-Armed God. Form 9. His opponent looked at him with a tilt of his head before blurring forward again and an even wider smile. A blurred kick is deflected with the side of the blade faster than his opponent expected. Form 7. With his opponent off balance for the first time, he takes a step forward, blade singing in his arms, and swings down, aiming to cut the leg at the knee. A palm sends the sword to the side, leaving only a shallow gash on the thigh. His foe had recovered. Form 4. He deflects a blow that sends a crack down the blade and bruises his wrist and pirouettes around the follow-up elbow strike, moving to his opponent's back before swinging the blade into his neck. The Mun, in another disgusting feat of strength and flexibility, twisted his neck fast enough to grab the blade by his teeth before biting down. Enamel against steel should have been no competition even with reinforcement. Steel broke. He skipped back and noted his now shortened blade. A Tonto style then. This time he doesn't think as much. He shifts his form into one he was very familiar with. Leaf-style willow form against his cousin's killer. There was no time to think. No time to plan. Against his inhuman speed, the only tools at his disposal were his eyes, instincts, and the broken blade in his hand. The fight was a whirlwind. His opponent's movements were too unpredictable for him to use Amaterasu. His attack pattern relentless. His stamina, even after going through 2 previous battles, seemed untouched, and even with his eyes on his opponent, all he could do was react. A blow snuck past his guard before burying itself into his rib. The pain of the originally cracked tube breaking from the impact fueled his resolve to bury the blade into the overextended arm in a desperate bid at cutting the forearm. His exertions forced only a wince from his foe as inhuman muscles flexed and stopped the blade from going in further than an inch while gripping it in the same moment. He released it and rolled backwards, dodging a kick that would have sent his head off. He had started flagging. For all his immense cursed energy, his body was just too young. Unlike chakra, cursed energy was too volatile. It was not as suitable for a still-developing child to stress. He looked into his opponent's eyes and the bright grin on his murderous face as he ducked under a fist and lashed out with a kick to his diaphragm that sent him into the air. He realized something. The Mun enjoyed the fight. The thrill. The pressure of a life lived on the knife edge. The bloodlust. The opportunity to indulge in combat for the sake of it, and for a second he saw a familiar blue-skinned Mun in his place. It resolved back into the black hair and black eyes of his opponent with a blink of his eye. The kick had propelled him into the immense tree that lay at the center of the tombs of the sky corridor. And the Mun had dug his hand into the tree to keep himself aloof. This was the first true respite he got since he stopped Geto from going the same way as Satoru, and that was all he needed to slow down his perception enough to think. For the first time, the Mun was stationary. Unmoving. Amaterasu could end this immediately. He considered it for all of 0.2 seconds before discarding it. The Mun had leverage and a platform. With his reflex and speed, he could dodge the black fire before it finished emerging. What he needed to do was draw him close. With a glance at the man's serene breathing pattern, he had to admit what he had suspected earlier. The Mun was holding back. He had seen his cousin's body. 2 different blade wounds. One on his head and the one that almost split him in half. None of them came from his discarded katana. One of the 2 mystery blades was what pierced Limitless, especially with his lack of innate cursed energy. The how was ambiguous, but the capacity for it existed. And yet when he looked at the Mun, he didn't see a single weapon, other than the purple segmented cursed spirit with a baby's face that lay coiled around his torso. Enhanced perception and a precognitive sight, those are what your eyes offer, are they not? He looked down upon him as he spoke. Yet you're hamstrung by a body too young and too weak to keep up. If you were maybe 10 years older, maybe this would have been a challenge. Releasing his grip on the tree, he landed on one of the thick knots of ropes that bound the tree and stared down at him with a tilt of his head and a knowing smile that reeked of arrogance. Yet I have to admit you're skilled. More skilled than jujutsu sorcerers 5 times your age. For all his bloodlust, the Mun was more analytical than he expected. He had to buy time, both for reinforcements and for his own risky plan. He never thought it had come to this. He had naively believed that he would never be truly challenged in this new world. He was wrong. He had not trained as hard as he could. He had forgotten that to protect what you want in any world, you needed strength. Now he was forced to make a choice he would rather not, yet he knew he would anyway. All he needed was to catch his breath and start twisting his cursed energy into what he desired. Immense strength, resilience, speed, and reflexes at the cost of your cursed energy. How is that? With a raised brow, that man considered his question. You're really a child, aren't you? To be unaware of a heavenly restriction. With the way you fought, I could have mistaken you for something else. A groan and movement a few meters behind him drew both their attention to the limp form of Geto forcing himself to his feet. He watched as the amusement and interest bled from the Mun into a soft frown that sent a chill down his spine. I don't suppose you'll just close your eyes and let me go, will you? His flat-eyed stare was all the reply the man needed. With another crack of his neck, he continued. I would rather not kill a kid barely older than mine, but you're not giving me much of a choice. An arm or a leg, then. With what you've shown so far, I'm sure you'll make do. With a soft smile and his arms spread out, he continued, my name is Toji. Toji Fushiguro. Don't forget the name of the Mun you're supposed to have your revenge on, you little monster. A blood-speckled whisper came from behind him. A whisper that saved him from losing an arm. A whisper that let him know the side of his body to protect. The cursed spirit. That was the only reason he looked to his right the moment Toji disappeared from his sight. The sheer speed the Mun had displayed earlier was ridiculous. But this was inconceivable. Without being able to read his cursed energy even before he moved, for the first time in both lives, his perception failed him. Appearing midair in front of him while drawing a one-edged broadsword with a fur hilt from the purple curse's mouth, Toji let out a bastardized Lado swing that aimed for his shoulder. He felt his cursed energy dip to dangerous degrees. Now, the broadsword was slowed down by the manifestation of a red spectral clavicle and scapula that formed above him. The swing only stopped after parting through 3 red ribs before halting a few meters from his actual shoulder. The dispersed force of the strike turned the area beneath them into a crater, sending him to his knees and blowing the struggling form of Geto and the collapsed buildings away. He could not say who was more surprised as he stared into shocked black eyes and could see his own expression reflected in them. He could feel the dip in his cursed energy, even as naked muscles formed around the skeleton torso that protected him instinctively. With the drain from his Susanoo, he knew he only had enough in reserve for one last strike. The gambit had paid off. Toji was stuck midair with no leverage for his immense speed. With a whisper, he unshackled his hold on the black flames, Amaterasu. He only had a spare second to watch the flames spring up on Toji before his vision blurred with a spike of excruciating pain that traveled from his eyes to his brain before he was finally sent crashing into the ground headfirst. Yet his hearing was clear enough to hear Toji's howl of pain before he was sucked into the empty embrace of unconsciousness. He was alive. How? The clash of blades and the splash of blood on stone forced him to blink his blurry eyes. He could feel himself bleed out, feel his lips grow cold as his life-giving blood leaked out of his body at a slow and steady pace. He forced himself to think through muddy thoughts. What did he last remember? A sharp grin on a scarred lip, black hair, a baby-faced cursed spirit spitting out a sword, then a shock of white hair. Satoru? The thought brought a degree of comfort till he remembered the conversation that led him to this point, bleeding out and hallucinating. Why are you here? Why? Ah, you mean that? I killed Gojo Satoru. Was it a lie? He tried to force his broken body up to help in holding off the monster. His body failed him. He could barely twitch. Was this how he died? Face down while someone else fought to protect him. A finger twitched as the sound of blades clashing and concrete shattering moved closer to him. Was this how he was going to stand at the top with Satoru? He'd promised him they would be the strongest jujutsu sorcerers. If Satoru was dead, then he would make sure to take the bastard that killed him down with him. This time he moved more than a finger. He spread his bruised palm flat on the ground and forced his body up with more grit than he remembered ever having. Ignoring the excruciating pain that came with his defiance, he finally raised his head up and watched the impossible. His savior was a little over 4 foot tall. White hair held in a bun like his and blood-red eyes. Jiki, how? The kid deflected a blow that sent shock waves through the broken corridor, dodged stomps that cracked concrete, and retaliated with the smooth confidence of a killer. A monster. He had heard the rumors. But watching the 4-foot-tall kid flip over an outstretched fist before swinging his sword and scoring a slash on a monster's forehead, then using that same fist as leverage to jump backward, all in one smooth movement, sent a cold chill down his spine. His sight blurred once more, and when he managed to blink it clear, he found himself leaning against broken debris with Jiki's back to him. The way he stood lightly and slightly hunched over broken ribs let him know he had missed the last couple of seconds. They were talking now, and he barely heard the name Toji. The sorcerer killer. He wanted to bark out a laugh. The sorcerer killer. The Zenin clan lost hound. Of course, who else would have taken a mercenary contract like that and done this to them? He needed to get up. If he did nothing, Jiki was going to die. He knew that for certain. Pushing himself off the debris, he went to a knee and drew what little ember of cursed energy he had left and fed it his anger, his shame, and his hate, and he watched it spark into a bonfire. When he looked up, ready to sell his life dearly for Jiki, the sorcerer killer moved. He only had time for a warning before he was blasted backward after a flash of red and white. The screams wrenched him out of blissful unconsciousness. He came to once again, this time in the arms of a 4-armed scaled curse spirit in a turtle position, Anakin. With a tap of his hand, the curse unfolded and dropped him on the floor, where he held on to it for balance. When he regained his balance, the scream had stopped, and he looked up to see the sorcerer killer was looking down at one of his arms on the ground as it got buried in black flames. He was wide-eyed, with gritted blood-speckled teeth, and with one hand on the stump of his forearm, trying to hold back the blood that gushed out from the field amputation. Yet even with that, Geto knew it would. If the Mun decided to turn on him, he would die. Simple as that. Ignoring him and the grade 2 curse spirit beside him, the Mun stared at the fallen form of Jiki, still wrapped in the rapidly fading form of a red-colored torso for a second before leaving in a blur of black. Letting out a heavy breath, he staggered forward with the aid of the cursed spirit beside him, sparing a simple glance at the fur-hilt sword the Mun had left behind before kneeling to access Jiki. The armored torso had dissipated completely without a steady source of cursed energy to fuel it, and his body lay cold, yet he heard the short jerking breath of someone holding on to his life. A glance at his face turned his blood to ice. Jiki's eyes were white. Pure white, with barely a circle distinguishing the whites and the pupil, with blood tracks running down his eyes. He refused to consider what it might mean, making his summon lift the boy gently, and in a bridal carry, they stumbled out of the tombs of the star corridor. JIKI-POV. He woke up to darkness. Long ingrained habits override the instincts to jerk up. He counted to 10 first, and when he was certain he was awake and not dreaming, he spread out his senses. His skin felt the soft grip of cotton that wrapped around his eyes as well as the one clothing him and an even thicker piece that covered him from his toes to his chest. He also noted a light pressure on his thighs. His nose picked out the sharp scent of antiseptics, industrial-grade cleaners, and dried blood along with a slight tang of zunda and cream kiki fuku. His ears distinguished 3 heartbeats, his steady cadence, an erratic beating heart belonging to the person resting ahead on his legs, and the slow heartbeat walking farther away pushing what he assumed was a trolley. His physical senses told him he was most likely on a hospital bed. The smell of zunda and cream kiku fuku brought to mind Satoru. But that was impossible. Satoru was dead. The forever fresh image of his cousin lying dead with multiple stab wounds in his throat, head, and chest forced an unconscious spasm. He sat up with force and braced himself a second later for pain. He sat waiting and waiting for the pain to hit, and after 5 seconds he had to admit that for some reason he couldn't feel it. Jiki. A surprised voice called out. A voice he had grown to know and care for. Impossible. He was dead. His 3-tomo Sharingan had noted the unmoving chest as his heart lay still inside a broken chest cavity. His eyes couldn't lie to him. They won't. Frantic hands reached up and ripped off the bandage around his eyes. When he opened it anew, he could barely see the blurred form ahead of him. Blind. He was blind. 2 lifetimes and 1 affliction. He could feel the hysteria form in his guts. Blindness. His composure broke. He could feel his hands reflexively scratching for his eyes once more. Why? Why did he always have to lose something? Why did he always have to make sacrifices? Had he not tried his best, what more could be asked of him? Soft hands gripped his thin wrists and stopped them from scratching his eyes out. Jiki, I'm here. This time the voice was lacking the previous surprise and held a soft firmness that forced his hysterical breathing to subside, yet he could not believe it. It's me, Jiki. Big brother Satoru is here. I'm all right and you will be too. The statement was punctuated by one hand leaving his wrist and dragging his head closer, letting their foreheads touch. The familiar movement calmed him in this close. His sight allowed him to see the blurred form of blood-streaked white hair and luminescent blue eyes. And for the second time in 2 lifetimes, Jiki let himself cry, holding onto Satoru in a death grip as tears streaked down his face. The tearful reunion was broken by the click of the door opening ahead of them, and like clockwork, Jiki could feel his walls form up again. Slower than usual, but by the time the 2 footsteps stopped to the foot of his bed, his face had a placid facade of apathy. The only sign of what happened barely seconds ago was the tear tracks lining his face. Heard you guys talking while we were outside. Decided to give you guys the chance to hash things out a bit. He noted the voice as Shoko's. A soft ruffle of hair and jerk of motion that he swiftly categorized as a nod came from the next person, who he guessed was Geto. How are you feeling, Suguru-san? He asked politely as he turned his face to the man he last remembered was halfway dead. Better than you, kid. There was something about the voice that triggered him the wrong way. Was it the intonation? The hollow tone behind the words? The false casualness? He was not sure, but he was certain something was wrong. A blur of motion and a muted shout let him know Shoko had smacked Geto at the back of his head. The action brought a soft smile to his face. Maybe he was the one ascribing thoughts where there were none. What about the mun? Toji Fushiguro. Those words killed every sound in the room. His ears picked up the sudden increase in heartbeat and palpitations from Geto and Satoru. He could feel Satoru's grip on his hand tighten for a second before it relaxed. He escaped was the simple answer he got from Satoru. He stared back at Satoru with empty white eyes, waiting for something more than that. This time it was Geto who finally spoke up and broke the silence. After you blacked out, he cut off the hand your technique caught, and then he just up and left. He gave a forced casual shrug that Jiki noted from the sound of clothes ruffling at shoulder height. Satoru woke up and found you half dead, and he's been by your side since, while we've looked around for him with not much luck. He was still alive then. His mask of placidity almost broke a second time. Toji had lost a hand, but he had aimed for his head. Amaterasu's manifestation was immediate, and he was too close to dodge. He should have caught the black embers on his face first, yet somehow the monster had managed to dodge back while still being fast enough to cut off the hand before the flames spread. Yeri, perceiving the mood sink even lower, clapped her hands loud enough to drag the 3 of them out of their funk. In other news, we've got good news and bad news for you, Jiki-kun. With that said, she walked over to the other side of the bed before pulling out a chair and sitting beside him. What do you want to hear first? He noted the sudden cheer in her voice. With a tilt of his head, he picked the good news. You can regain your sight. The word sent his back ramrod straight before he relaxed back into the bed. Silent as a doorknob. Not even Lady Tsunade could have promised him that. The curse of the Manjiiko lay in the eyes, deteriorating the more it was used. In this case, it had happened faster than he anticipated, which he attributed to cursed energy and his age as well as the simultaneous usage of Amaterasu and Susanoo. The only cure for the blindness that followed was the implantation of another eye, while simultaneously depriving the other person of sight. "Oh," his voice came out a whisper. "Reverse curse technique," came the cheerful reply. "I got confirmation on scanning your eyes through Satoru briefly going over to the Gojo clan and kindly requesting for you after they took you from ghetto." He interpreted that to mean Satoru leveled 1 or 2 buildings and forced them to give him up. He could understand their position. They believed the Sharingan was a mutation of the 6 eyes. Insight into it might prove insight into the 6 eyes. Letting that kind of information outside the clan must have felt heretical. He would have to try to smooth out ruffled feathers whenever he got back to the clan. The pathways that lead from your brain to your eyes are heavily degraded. Most likely due to a sudden and heavy surge of cursed energy. Luckily for you, there are few things the reversed curse technique can't do. Healing your eyes is not one. Especially in the hands of the most talented reverse-cursed sorcerer Japan has seen in the past century. She bragged easily. With a quick ruffle of his head, she stood up and started heading out. The bad news is that, even with my help, it won't be easy. Your eyes are unique. The pathways are different, with entire sections seemingly made out of cursed energy. But with Satoru's 6 eyes manipulating cursed energy while I heal, it won't be impossible. She grabbed Satoru and dragged him off, while Geto came around to pull the struggling Satoru's other arm. "We'll give you the chance to rest. Plus you've had another guest who has not left your side for the past week." As they stepped out of the room, someone else stepped in. The heavy tang of salt and water as well as rough breathing gave him an idea of who stepped in. With a soft smile, he looked towards her crying form and called out softly, "Aiko." She ran for him before slamming into him hard while gripping him tightly. He ignored her disheveled appearance, considering he couldn't see much of it, and hugged her back just as fiercely. He woke up face down in a pool of drool and his own blood staining the futon. He tried lifting himself up and almost stumbled at the action. He shrugged off the cloth that had been spread over him and raised an eyebrow as he looked down at the stump of his arm. The memory of the fight came back easily to him. He remembered stumbling to an apartment before dropping right at the entrance. How did he end up on a child-sized futon? He looked up and saw the sleeping form of his son tucked into a blanket and lying on a chair overlooking him, Megumi. "Please take care of Megumi." That memory, the voice, cracked something in him. Looking at the kid reminded him of the little monster he fought. He let out a sharp grin as he immersed himself in that memory. The pain of his missing arm seemed to disappear as he let himself go. What he would have given to continue that fight. He had noticed the white-haired boy's technique get crisper. His blows flowed smoother even as his body tired. It had felt like he was sharpening a steel blade that had let itself rust. The drip of blood passing through a roughly applied tourniquet drew his attention back to the present. It was the work of a split second to clench his muscles tight, seamlessly stopping the blood flow to the arm. A quiet shuffle and an inaudible murmur drew his attention back to Megumi. They were about the same age, he noted, judging by the height, maybe a year or 2 difference. He would be giving him up to the Zenin clan soon. "Please take care of Megumi." He shook his head in a futile attempt at forgetting that particular memory. He smoothly transitioned to his feet and walked out of the room. He was not certain of that choice again. The Gojo clan had made a monster of the kid, and while he had never given much thought about his, he was certain she would not have approved of his choice. "Please take care of Megumi." Now, he was even more sure of that. He walked past a sleeping face that bore so much resemblance to hers and unintentionally sped up his walk out of the room. If anyone was going to make a monster of his son, shouldn't it be him? This was why he stayed away. He couldn't bear being reminded of her every second, every day. Yet when he was at his lowest, this was where his legs brought him to, and the kid had replaced his original bandage of a ripped shirt, even if his was messily applied. He stepped into the kitchen of the apartment, turning on the tap. He stuck his head under and allowed the water to wash away the grime that had settled on his face overnight. A side door opened, and he spun around in preparation but was met with a surprised face of Tsumaki as she stared down his one-handed, bruised, and battered form. He faced her with a smile and smoothly moved the kitchen knife he had swiped behind himself. "Where's your mother, Tsumiki-chan?" Aiko. Despite what the majority of the people who came across Jiki in recent times thought, he had no issues with being blind, other than an initial and short-lived distaste of it. Ever since his eye wrap had become a semi-permanent feature of his, he had seemed to pick up on moving without sight just as well as he did even with access to his eyes. She watched attentively as he smoothly maneuvered around a table that he somehow knew to be there, picked up a paintbrush he knew to be a darker shade of red, and splashed it along his canvas. His furious strokes might have been mistaken as him putting his anger at his condition into his art, but one single look at his unchanging expression that still managed to bear a soft smile put that notion to rest. He dropped the red brush and picked up a blue-colored one before returning his focus to his painting. She placed the cup of tea she'd made in the kitchen beside his brushes, and he grabbed it, took a sip, and dropped the cup back on the tray in one smooth movement. The two additional maids and guards that had been assigned to them ever since his run-in with the sorcerer killer stared at the impossible scene in front of them with a gobsmacked expression while she forced herself to hold in a laugh. She looked back at his canvas, focusing on the rapidly forming images of two people who had similar features. One in a black and red robe, the other in blue and white, as they clashed with a backdrop of red and black that she suspected were eyes. She felt the laughter die in her throat. The image managed to provoke a feeling of grief, pain, and sadness in her, and this was it, just halfway done. She looked down on his white hair and soft smile as he continued with his masterful strokes. In another life, he would have painted all he wanted. They would have shared tea, cookies, and sweets as she praised him for his beautiful paintings before rushing him off to have his bath and rinse the paint out of his hair. Unfortunately, this was not that life. The phantom pain that she felt in her right rib disabused her of that fantasy. He was no longer only the sweet boy who kissed her on her cheek or held her hands when she felt down. The clan had seen what he could do, what he could become, and they made every effort to forge him into becoming their blade. His recent injury only slowed them down as they allowed him the chance to rest and recover, pending when he was healed completely. All this was because of her. If only she had the grace to die that day, maybe dash. Her thoughts were cut short as she felt a soft and slightly calloused, paint-stained hand slip into hers. She shook her head and glanced around, noting the envious gazes the new maid sent her way and the apathetic one the guard replied to her with, before finally looking down at him. He stared up at her with a soft smile on his face. He had noticed her turbulent emotions and stopped his painting to soothe her. "Aiko?" He spoke with a leading question. She shook her head before realizing he was still temporarily blind. He gave a sudden smile as if he somehow knew what she did. "I'm okay, Jiki-kun. Sorry for distracting you," she replied with a subservient nod. His reply was cut off as his head snapped to the entrance of the outside gazebo they rested in. A few seconds later, a man dressed in the more traditional style of the clan climbed the stairs, and with a glance at them and a deferential nod at Jiki, he spoke. "Miss Yuri is here to see you." With a swift nod of his head, Jiki turned around to put his tools back in order, but she stopped him when he was about to start washing the paint off the brush. "Leave it to us, Jiki-san." She gave him a firm nod before gesturing to the two other maids. While they both had years on her age-wise, she had served Jiki since he was born, and few would dare pull rank on her when Jiki had favored her so heavily. Especially when it was an open secret the clan leader called on her about his progress. She stayed behind as Jiki and the guard walked towards the main clan compound. As they walked away, she felt him grow even more distant. His movements smoothed out and the walls formed once again. She could not help him there, in the battles he would face. But she could always make sure he had a comfortable home to get back to, a place where he wouldn't have to be one of the next clan head candidates and could simply be her little Jiki. With that last comforting thought, she stiffened her back and turned back to the two maids, directing them to clean up his outdoor studio. "Shoko." Letting out a heavy sigh, she breathed out and stopped her cursed energy from reconstructing itself from negative to positive. She took her hands off Jiki's head before letting out a heavy yawn and stretching her back. Jiki took it as an invitation to sit up, his bone-white hair falling down his shoulders, giving him a soft and fragile look. She almost stretched her hand to pull on his cute little cheeks before stopping herself. She remembered the damage his fight with the sorcerer killer did to the tomb corridor. Jiki was no fragile child to be cuddled and pampered. He was usually a bastion of stoic apathy most of the time, so very unlike his cousin. A strand of hair fell over his face, and he puffed up his cheeks to blow it away, revealing gray-white eyes. She let out a short giggle at the scene before walking behind him to help him pack it up in the bun he preferred, although she realized his hair was getting too much to keep it tied up for long. "Improvements?" she asked, ignoring his cute frown. He turned to face her before looking around the room that had been assigned to them. "Some colors," he said slowly, stepping down from the bed he had been resting on for the past 2 hours. "The brown of the floorboard, the white glare of the bulbs, and the soft brown of your hair," he finished, looking at her. The charmer, she let out a soft smile before finally giving in to the urge and pulling his cheeks. "If you're done then, Yeri-sama." Her smile swiftly adjusted into a frown at the kimono-clad man who stepped up to them. She knew of the 4 others who stood guard outside, waiting for the slightest threat from her. They wouldn't have tried this if Satoru were here. They would not have even dared come anywhere close, but alas, Satoru was busy chasing the tracks of the sorcerer killer while a thoroughly disillusioned Suguru had up and gone rogue. Letting out another heavy sigh, she noted she had been sighing more often than usual. Bringing out a pack of cigarettes and a lighter, she started to walk back out. Jiki only needed 3 more sessions, and she was sure he was going to return to being the child that made the other clans worry so much about what the Gojos were feeding their children. Unfortunately, he had proven inept at the reversed curse energy technique just like his cousin had originally, which was of course certainly in no way her fault, not a chance. "Thanks a lot, Shoko-san." She waved him off and continued walking out before remembering the gift she brought him. "Here, take this." She rummaged in her pocket for a second before finding and tossing him the small package. Suguru sent it over. A thank you gift for saving his life back then. The throw started to go off course before he snapped his hand out and grabbed the package midair, without even looking. She ignored the uncanny spatial awareness and athletic feat that she was certain was above hers before hustling out of the room even faster. She was not sure how Jiki would take the news of Suguru's deeds, and she would rather not be the one to tell him. Let his cousin face that drama, what she would give to watch it with popcorn in hand. He could not say how it began. Where the care and love he had accumulated in this life began. No, that was a lie. Looking to his side, the smiling and clapping bright-eyed form of Aiko dispelled that notion. He knew the catalyst for this change. He had lived his past life surrounded by expectations and responsibilities and ended it reviled, hated, and alone. The knowledge of how he helped end the war was left to a single person. He begins this new life surrounded by family. He spots Satoru slamming the conical birthday party hat on the blonde head of Nanami. Friends. Another glance to the side, and he spots Shoko bearing a smile while pursuing Yutaheim and looking surprisingly less tired than usual. Mei sat under the shade, drink in hand, and stared back at him with a half-lidded gaze and a soft smile. All this was because of her. She was the one that pulled him out of his torpor. Stayed by him during the few nights when that particular deed came back to haunt him. She was the one that made him truly embrace this new life he had been offered. He thought back to how the day started before he found himself surrounded by family and friends in a random park in Tokyo. He had just finished washing himself. After denying Aiko's aid for the 7th time after she tried to help him, she finally took the hint and left him to himself. Then she suddenly came back to help him a few times, stating his newfound disability, but he had disabused her of the notion that his lacking sight suddenly made him useless. Stepping out of the bathtub, he stretched his hand and took the towel from its stand, drying his hair and body. He forced his hair into its bun and idly noted its increased weight. He would either have to cut it soon or change the way he carried it. Going to the clothes he knew were spread out, he swiftly touched the 2 fabrics and noted Aiko had spread out 2 different styles. One was a formal-style kimono with a matching heiori and a different style hakama. The other was a more casual oversized shirt and shorts. It was not a difficult pick. He stepped out in the oversized top and shorts and noted Aiko must have been waiting outside for him, IRAP in hand as well as a small box. His eyes had been getting better ever since he started the reversed curse technique healing sessions, but he still covered them up on Shoko's orders. The eyes were still sensitive, and stressing them would render all the work she had put in useless. Shoko-san has set up a new location for your last treatment. So it was not going to be in the clan compound, he mused while putting on the matching black earrings Geto had gotten him. That was not surprising. The clan had grown very protective in a very stifling way ever since his injury, and outsiders like Shoko had borne the brunt of it. Where will we be going? He started to walk out as he asked, heading towards the door of his modest-sized building with preternatural awareness of his surroundings. The door was opened by someone his senses had noted was the driver, with his sharp-edged curse energy residual, as well as his steady heartbeat and the light scent of apples. Shiba Park in Minato City, Tokyo. A park? He noted the absence of his other maids and extra guard and realized this must have been planned, especially if they had also gotten the clan head's approval, and they were not just sneaking out. The car was opened by the driver, and he made his way in before shifting further in and giving Aiko the chance to sit beside him. He was curious still. As soon as she was seated and the driver had moved to his seat, he continued, "Is there any special reason why the final treatment is being done in a park?" He could not see her, but he could hear the way her neck turned to face him. "Today is the 9th of June, she answered like that made any difference. "Okay." He knew she kept her head staring at him with what he assumed was a puzzled look on her face. The same puzzled look he was certain was mirrored on his. She snapped her head forward and ignored his leading question, which was even more surprising than anything that had happened today. Giving up and letting the mystery remain what it was, he closed his eyes and let his head rest back, allowing himself to sink into the blissful nothingness that was sleep. They walked into the park hand in hand. He could hear the joyful shouts of children as they ran around, as well as the heavier steps that were always behind them. Parents, he deduced. As they walked further into the park, he realized they were moving towards a more isolated location. The sounds from the park gradually shifted from dogs barking, children's laughter and nervous parents fiddling with heightened heartbeats, to the sound of birds chirping, leaves ruffling, and the soft whistle-like sound of the wind passage. A flex of his cursed energy noted only one person ahead as well as his driver a few meters away. Farther than he expected. Hiya, Jiki, ready to finally lose those eye wraps. The person he had sensed shouted as soon as they got close, then Shoko. So this was not some elaborate attempt at an attack or kidnapping. He let his tense shoulders relax before giving her a formal bow. "Shoko-san, I'll be forever grateful for your aid." "On, my cute and formal little Jiki-kun. How the hell did you and that bastard Satoru come from the same family?" The change in tone brought a smile to his face. He was directed to lie down on a blanket-covered portion of the grass, and with Shoko's hand on his head, he felt her go to work. He objectively noted Satoru's absence once more with a soft frown. Something had been going on for the past few months. Something bad, something relating to Geto. Yet they were intent on keeping him in the dark for some reason. With those thoughts in mind, he felt Shoko's positive cursed energy flow into him. It never seemed to stop surprising him how similar to chakra it felt, especially compared to negative cursed energy. He could feel it travel through pathways before stopping on his eyes and sinking into them. They stayed like that for close to an hour, and Jiki could feel his optic nerves connect and strengthen. Feel the great blots of nothingness that covered his vision most of the time gradually clear up. And with a great sigh from Shoko, he knew she was done. Rising gently, he moved to remove the eye wraps that were surprisingly not taken off this time around, but he felt Aiko's slightly calloused arms stop him with more strength than he expected. Relinquishing his grip, he felt her hands move to the eye wrap and gently loosen it. The immediate spike of multiple cursed energy signatures around him sent his instincts into fight or flight. Were they hiding behind a barrier to ambush them? He immediately shifted his eyes from its dull gray form to its three-eyed Tomo. The sudden clarity of vision nearly brought tears to his eyes. The sight of Satoru, Mei, Nanami, and Yutaheim with bright smiles on their faces with a big cake in the middle did. Happy birthday, Jiki. This image was something he knew he would never forget. The purity of the memory would forever remain untarnished thanks to his blessed eyes. Aiko dragged him by his hand and forced him into the festivities. How are the new eyes, Jiki-kun? He looked up just as Satoru plopped down beside him and rested an arm around his shoulder. This close to his cousin, he realized this was the first time they were meeting in over a month. His eyes noted the dark circles under the teen's eerie blue eyes, as well as the flushing of his cheeks that indicated his intoxication. Satoru had been very busy since he was acknowledged as a special-grade sorcerer, and the burden of those expectations seemed to weigh heavily on his slim shoulders, especially with the disappearance of Geto. What have you been up to? You look tired, he countered. Mao, traveling around and putting the more pesky curses down. Satoru answered with a comical flex of his arm. Knowing him, he probably decimated them with red while he watched them flail against Limitless with a grin on his face. His cousin's first option in combat hardly ever came down to close quarters. I heard about that. How's that been? Boring mostly, Satoru answered before lying down on the grass. Jiki gave a glance at the grass before joining him to watch the skies. Few real special grade curses to actually prove a challenge. It's been mostly hordes of weaker second or first grade curses. With the rare rogue sorcerer. Rogue sorcerers? He asked with an amused voice. The name brought back memories of his time as a missing nin. For all his early education under the clan and his tutors, a lot of deeper details seemed left out. The heavenly restriction of the sorcerer killer was one. Now rogue sorcerers. If he were a less trustworthy person, he would assume the clan was keeping details away from him, but objectively he knew it was one of the things he was expected to learn when he got to Jujutsu High. Mostly self-taught sorcerers, sorcerers that follow the old ways of master and apprentice, or sorcerers that refuse to join the Jujutsu society. The higher-ups deem them rogue and generally blacklist them from a lot of opportunities frequently offered to sorcerers. He gave a thought to the situation. Blacklisting an entire group of sorcerers would only force them to go dark, purposely creating an underworld community of jujutsu sorcerers. He wanted to call it stupid, but he also had to admit he had little to no knowledge of the wider world. Why are you filling my cute little Jiki's head with such dreary topics on his own birthday? Mei-san interjected. He had not even heard the blue-haired woman's movement, despite the way she always seemed to saunter around. He's going to be the next big bad special grade sorcerer like his big cousin. I'm only getting him ready, Satoru answered with a fake pout. Special grade. A weird and vague system of ranking that the Jujutsu Society seemed to have. A grade system that went beyond just the people but also included cursed objects, cursed tools, and the cursed weapons they fought with. Starting from grade 4 to grade 1. Then there were the special grades. From the little he had been taught, they were not necessarily the strongest. They were just built differently, their abilities scaled outside the more rigid structure of Jujutsu grading, and all of them seemed to possess a spark. A spark that always preceded them, a spark that made them better than most, a spark that spoke of greatness. A spark that he supposedly possessed from birth. Something he didn't care much for, he had to admit. It's lonely at the top, you know, Satoru finished in a more subdued tone. He looked at his cousin and changed his mind on the spot as he remembered the particular conversation they had a few months ago. He might not care for it, but his cousin seemed determined to change the way the clans and Jujutsu society worked in general. He reminded him of another idealistic cousin he had in another life. A cousin, he failed in the end. It was going to be different this time, he promised himself. He was not going to fail, not again. He didn't know what prompted him to speak the words. What made power sink and reverberate into them as the words left his lips? Why those words forced the world to stop for a moment, but he said it anyway. With all the conviction formed from 2 lives of struggle and bloodshed, he made a promise. You won't be for long. The moment he uttered them, the world seemed to hold its breath. He could feel multiple eyes snap to their location. Chirping birds went silent, while summer winds stopped stirring up the grass. The clouds stood suddenly stagnant and refused to continue their unearthly voyage among the sky. Eerie blue eyes stared into sinister red, and at that moment they knew that come rain or high water, come disaster or tragedy, neither of them would ever have to face it alone ever again. Never felt the world bend and fold over for a binding vow like that. Mei broke the moment with a focused stare that she aimed at him from her usual serene facade. If it was anyone else, I would have laughed in their face and awaited their funeral, kid or not. But he's not just anyone, is he? Satoru broke in and he looked to the side and realized everyone was looking at them with wide eyes. Satoru continued heedless of the ridiculous look everyone was giving them. Mad with laughter and joy, even the heavy feeling that seemed to weigh so heavy on him seemed to have disappeared. He is my little cousin. With all the commotion happening around him, he only had one real thought in his head. What the hell was a binding vow? 6 years was a lot of time to grow, Jiki realized in hindsight, as he looked down at the broken figure of his latest challenger. His perception of time and ability per age group had always been heavily skewed, considering how fast he developed in both lives. As a child, he had always been weighed down with responsibilities, forced to develop faster and mature quicker than his peers. This was the culmination of that experience. Sweat slowly slid down his back, forcing his long bone-white hair to stick to his clothes. Spreading out his preternatural spatial awareness, he took note of the way they looked at him, even as he stood above the broken body of the supposedly strongest GOJO of his generation. He let his eyes wander back to the older teen. There was nothing notable about him other than his white hair and green eyes, which signaled his bloodline was as pure as it could be without him being Satoru. If this was the caliber of sorcerers the Gojo clan was producing recently, he could see why his awakening was so celebrated. Acknowledgement to where it's due, the older teen had been the most resilient he had fought so far, with fiery green eyes that spoke of some kind of grudge against him. He could not, for the life of him, care, although Aiko had taken to giving him dossiers on the noteworthy clan members, and he recalled the older teen used to be something of a genius before his awakening. Envy? Envy-fueled tenacity had pushed the older teen to last for so long against cursed energy-enhanced strikes that broke bones and sundered flesh. The teen had stood indomitable. Jiki could give him that if nothing else. 6 years ago, he would not have gotten past his fourth opponent. That was how horrible his stamina used to be. He would have struggled to land a real deliberating hit if he had ever managed to get this far. He would have left the spar with bruises and fractured bones. Now, the only bruises on his form were on his knuckles from trying to break past his defense. Any other challenger? The aged voice of Old Man Tatsumi, the former clan head, called out. Jiki sent roving scarlet eyes out to see who would take up the challenge. Most turned away before he got to them. A few met his placid stare with furious eyes. He noted they were the people more allied with the traditionalists from Aiko's reports. It seemed like his consistent success was grating on them. Was it because he had been vocal in his support for Satoru, despite their obvious desire to pit him against his cousin? Had they really believed he would allow himself to be a puppet for them, fighting their narrow-minded shadow battles as a sacrificial pawn? He mused as he stared back at them. He'd had enough of that to last him 10 lifetimes. I will exchange instructions with Junior Jiki if he'll have me, an older voice called out. His eyes moved to the side, and he stared down the older man who decided to take up the challenge. Gojo Tanaka was one of Satoru's generation. At 24 years old, he was believed to be one of the most talented people born of the clan in recent times. His mastery of the inherited limitless technique was notable, even without the accompanying 6 eyes, and was matched by few save for the elders. Old Man Tatsumi gave him a look, waiting for him to approve or reject. With a 10-year age gap, he had the right to approve or disapprove of a spar against the older man. Going into this fight, he and everyone watching understood he was going to be disadvantaged, especially with the restrictions the clan had set on his usage of Amaterasu. Yet this particular sparring ground was called the Sugawara Blood Furnace for a reason. Named after the great ancestor, and for that reason, spars here were bloody, rarely turned down without bringing great dishonor, and death was never a surprising result. The supposed goal was to sharpen the younger generation in times of peace, and the heavily weathered platform was supposedly over 1,000 years old. To win 9 fights simultaneously had only been done once. Aiko noted that Satoru had walked out that day laughing at the broken form of the opponents he left behind. That was the day that truly cemented his cousin's place as the greatest sorcerer in the clan. Jiki had won 8 fights so far, and he knew if he wanted to make sure his vow to Satoru was upheld, he would have to stand side by side with him. Matching his record here was just going to be the first step. He sent his scarlet gaze down to the particular man waiting for him. His short white hair framed a strong and chiseled jaw, with a heavy-set brow and light blue eyes. His rugged features were set on the bulky frame of someone who was used to taking hits and dishing them out in return. With his classical features of a Gojo and his derivative of the same limitless technique as Satoru, Jiki was certain he had been groomed as Satoru's replacement in case his cousin ever fell. Jiki tensed his muscles all at once, holding the stance for 5 seconds before releasing them back and enjoying the short euphoria that passed through him at the lessened tension on his body. Shrugging off the already sweat-soaked yukuta, he allowed it to bunch up at his waist as the sparring gi he tied on his waist held it. Exposing a physique that had no business resting on a 14-year-old boy, he spread out his leg into the familiar form of the 4-winged crow kata stance with one arm forward that called for his opponent. Come. His opponent sent him a sharp smile before quickly moving to his feet and walking up to the stage with a sense of swagger and confidence that bordered on arrogance. Jiki stared him down, knowing this for what it was, a setup. It was a plan to reduce his standing in the clan, and he was certain his opponents before now had all been curated to tire him out, reduce his cursed energy output, and then send in someone he would struggle with. He had been prepared for it and sprung the trap carelessly after he decided to undergo his forging. He had a plan of his own after all, and it all hinged on a technique that required little cursed energy and immense control. Immense control that he had refined and focused on over the past 6 years. Begin. The spar started with a blistering pace. His opponent ran at him full tilt before lashing out with a low kick aimed at his legs to cripple. His eyes predicted it for what it truly was, a feint. So he ignored it and leaned back to dodge the real attack, an uppercut that went for his jaw. Noting his ability to predict and dodge, the older man immediately transitioned from strikes to grabs. Moving closer and taking hold of his arm. Jiki moved even closer, planting a foot on his opponent's front knee, putting a stop to the forward motion. Before whipping out another kick to the man's side. A kick that stopped 6 inches away from his ribs by the man's application of the limitless technique. He forced his sweat-slicked arm out of his opponent's grip just as a palm strike was thrown at his chest. A palm strike he dodged by spinning around it and burying 2 solid blows into the man's rib and leg, both of which were stopped by limitless. The Mun was slow and careless. Jiki observed as he ducked past another wide blow and a desperate grab at his hair, forcing him to twist his neck to the side. His false infinity fostered an unwarranted pride in him that made him ignore the use of blocks and dodges and focus solely on heavy blows and feints. Their plan was simplistic. He was notably the fastest in the clan. Factor in the way his eyes could predict his opponents, and he was easily faster than Satoru even. So they had tired him out with consecutive fights, then set him up against a bruiser. Jiki had to admit that he never had much expectation about hitting the older man. His blows and attacks were probing to see just how good his limitlessness actually was. A limitless he found wanting. When he had gotten all the data he needed, he jumped back. Despite the way he paced himself, he had never been built for endurance. In his past life and this. After 8 consecutive fights, he was undeniably tired, and his heavy breaths were noticed, judging by the even sharper grin the Mun sent his way. Tired already? He ignored the older man's taunt and allowed him his false confidence. His usage of the neutral form of limitless was good, very good in fact, especially without the aid of the 6 eyes. But it was not perfect. There was only so much space his limitlessness could divide without the superhuman perception granted by the 6 eyes. Which meant there was only so much force his seemingly invulnerable barrier could disperse and slow down before something got past. He relaxed his form, sinking his cursed energy into his body in a way that he had not done often. He felt his cursed energy snake past skin and blood to reinforce his muscles and tendons. The way it streaked around his bones and nerves soothed him, bracing them against what was to come. He had enhanced his physical form in a way that few could match, yet that was just in preparation for his actual plan. The Mun walked towards him casually. Content in his belief that without his Manjiiko, he could not break past limitless. So Jiki sank into an even lower stance, bracing himself against the ground. The older man's reply at his turtling up was a charge and another telegraphed-wide haymaker aimed to bash his head in. This focused, his Sharingan predicted the movement and he ducked under the blow with little effort. In one smooth movement, he sent his left foot forward and felt the force of the step crack the sparring ground before twisting his hips and putting all his coiled momentum from his legs to his bruised knuckles inside the single most impressive punch he had ever thrown in this life. The blow landed on the flawed infinity between them, stopping short a few inches away from his chest. His opponent's reply was a grin down at him. The pinpoint explosion of cursed energy that landed at the exact same second the blow landed changed everything. He could feel the monstrous force of the blow hit the limitless space between him and his opponent, sensing the way the flawed limitless struggled to divide space continuously till it just couldn't anymore. The moment limitless had a limit to how much space it could divide. It broke. The recoil hit Jiki, but he was braced for it. He was forced to take only a step back, further cratering the ground while his hair was blasted back by the wind. His opponent had no option but to take the remaining half of the dispersed force of the enhanced blow to his chest with his eyes wide. The conical force that blasted out of the blow decimated and destroyed everything in its path. The arena was obliterated a few inches away from him, and only the hastily deployed barrier of Old Man Tatsumi had stopped the spectators from becoming a casualty of his feat of strength. He let out a heavy breath and straightened his posture before watching the result of his work. The building the spar was occurring in was missing a full section, having caved inwardly, while a full half of the arena itself was nothing but sand and debris. A slight trembling from his limbs drew his attention down to his right fist. It was not perfect, he muttered to himself as his right hand shook with pain from torn muscles and strained bones. Even with the reinforcement he applied, the enhanced strength technique he used required a level of conditioning that he never bothered with. His hair finally settled in the wind before falling and spreading out on his back. He looked back up and noted the fear and horror that the spectators looked back at him with. He let his eyes search and found the broken and still form half buried into the wall, and he felt nothing. Winner, Jiki. Oldman Tatsumi noted with a bored tone and barely perceptible smile on his straight visage. His unruffled form stood out against the multitude of people that were coated with dust. Jiki sent a respectful nod his way before turning his gaze towards the elder's seat. They were the only other people fully spared from the damage he caused, where the majority of them had a respectful or thoughtful look on their face. One older woman, in particular, sent him a hate-filled glare. He shrugged the look off and started walking off the cracked platform. He had wiped out one clan before. If he was forced to once more, maybe Satoru would even celebrate it. Knock, knock. Jiki, come in and take a seat, he called out as he kept on serving the tea that he just finished making. The door opened, and Jiki walked in. He was losing the soft features that came with childhood, Tatsumi noted, truly growing into his mother's sharper features. White long hair flowed down his back in a ponytail and a tranquil look. If he were not present, he would have found it hard to believe he was the same person who had shaken the foundations of the clan barely 12 hours ago. He was dressed in a baggy long-sleeved sweater that covered his newly bandaged right hand and a matching pair of black shorts, with a pair of black slides he left at the door. Following behind him was the soft black-haired and amber-eyed form of his maid-turned-seneschal. Few would dare treat her like a true maid in the clan, despite how she made sure to wear the black and white maid outfit every day. It was what she carried in her hands that interested him. You managed to finish it then? He asked as he finally sat down opposite the kid, before taking a cup and sipping his own tea. The night before the forging, forgive me for not bringing it earlier. Enough with the overly formal pleasantries, brat, he said as he dropped his teacup and looked at the now smiling young teen. I'm no longer the clan head. We don't have to bother with that facade. I assume Aiko is the one carrying it because of your hand. The boy's smile slowly transitioned into a frown as he brought up the arm to stare at it. It's temporary. The technique still needs a bit of work. The slight movement made his arm tremble for a moment, and his frown deepened before smoothing out into his regular look. Another technique the boy had created in his off time. It was a technique that let Jiki display a strength of arms even he found it hard to wrap his head around. At this rate, the boy would be showing his teachers new ways to apply cursed energy by the time he started Jujutsu High. I'll give Shoko a call. He cleared his throat and gave the brat the stink eye before speaking. You would go to her, even when I'm here? Unfortunately, I do not have any more 6-year-olds to offer up as payment for your specific brand of healing. He almost broke the cup in his hand at the accusing tone the boy lashed him with. He instead gave him a flat look that forced the normally calm teen to look away and focus back on his tea. Puberty. If he was being honest, he didn't blame the brat. I do not regret it, you know, he replied as he lessened his grip on the teacup before giving a glance at the frozen woman behind Jiki. If we had to do it over again, I would make the same offer. And I know you will accept it once more. Hate me for that if you will. He returned to taking a sip of his tea. He did not blame the brat for holding a grudge for this long. For all his maturity, what did he know of leadership, of watching his storied bloodline degenerate? Watching a clan that was known to be descended from Michizane Sugawara himself suddenly decline in a generation with only one pillar to prop it up. He had seen the chance to add another pillar, and today had proven him right beyond any reasonable doubt. If by some chance something befell Satoru, Jiki would be a solid replacement. Whatever comes after that would be the burden of whoever is the new clan head. He hoped one day the boy would understand that. Tatsumi-san, a soft voice suddenly spoke up, cracking the built-up tension. Your package. He looked back up and noted this was the first time the girl had ever taken the initiative in a discussion and interjected when the mood was so low just to draw attention from Jiki. She wilted as she met his gaze, suddenly shrinking back behind the brat. In other news, Elder Kahori has requested you be punished for destroying a sacred heirloom of the clan, he said, shifting the conversation away from choices made in the past. A huff and an uncharacteristic chuckle from the kid finally broke the tension. Any relation to the recently deceased Tanaka-san? He was her grandson, Tatsumi noted with an approving nod. The kid might not have liked it much, but he had a firmer grasp of clan politics. More than Satoru had ever bothered to learn or pick up. I should be expecting some form of retaliation then? She wouldn't dare, not while I'm around, and not while Satoru is still the clan head. And the punishment? The kid asked while picking up his tea with his left hand. Tatsumi noted. 2 days of seclusion. It'll give you the chance to contemplate your part in the death of a loyal member of that clan. he stated with an exaggerated wave. They all knew that it was no real punishment. Even the facade of it was only possible because Satoru had traveled out of the country. By your will then. The brat took his last sip of tea before placing it back on the table and standing up. Collecting the package from Aiko, he balanced it on a single hand before passing it on to him. With a deferential nod, he spun about on his feet and walked out, the maid trailing behind him as an ever-constant shadow. One of the startling similarities between his past life and this was the people's love for hot baths. He was never one for vanity, but after spending 2 days in solitary confinement, the opportunity to soak in the hot bath was as heavenly as they come. For the first time in years, he allowed Aiko to join him, although he restricted her access to getting the grime out of his hair and soaking it in copious amounts of shampoo and soap. "So you think I should cut it?" he asked in lieu of starting a conversation. His question was met with uncharacteristic silence, and he forced his eyes open to look up at her. Her short black hair was let down to her shoulders, while her wolf-like amber eyes seemed duller than usual, with stress lines vaguely like his lining her face. "Aiko," he called out once more, gently this time, snapping her out of whatever fugue held her attention. "Are you all right?" She briefly shook her head in an attempt to physically disperse her thoughts before seeming to realize what the motion meant, then rapidly transitioning into a nod that brought a chuckle to his lips. "Sorry for spacing out, Jiki-san. What is wrong?" he asked again, this time sitting up and turning to face her, letting the lower half of his body remain hidden in the fog of mist and water that covered his private bathhouse. "Nothing serious, Jiki-san. I'm just a bit tired." He noted the lie for what it was but ignored it, turned back, and sank into the water after giving her hand a tight squeeze that brought back memories of the first time he woke up as Gojo Jiki. When she was more comfortable and ready, she would open up to him, and he'd be there to listen whenever she wanted to speak. "I was asking about my hair. Do you think I should cut it?" Even he wasn't sure why he left it to grow out so much. But if he had to guess, it was because Aiko enjoyed braiding it back for him whenever she had the chance. "It looks really good on you, Jiki-san. But I saw your last match and your opponent's attempt to grab at it. If he managed to get it, I don't want to think about what might have happened." He considered her words. His last fight against Tanaka was one of the things that reminded him of the danger of letting it grow out. There were plenty of advantages and few real disadvantages to cutting it. Knock knock. They both turned their heads to look at the door. "Come in," he called out as he sensed the cursed energy of the person who knocked. The brown-haired figure of one of his newer maids came in with a deferential bow. "Your ride is ready, Jiki-san, and we've called ahead to let Shoko-san know we're on our way." "Okay," he replied succinctly, and she gave out another bow before shuffling backward and closing the sliding door. He glanced up and saw the look Aiko sent the maid. He had originally planned on sending them off after his recovery, but Aiko had disagreed, citing their aid in taking care of the household and allowing her to focus on his person. He had not seen fit to argue it. With a sigh, he forced his way out of the calming hot water, ignoring Aiko's brief squeak of shock, in amusement. She passed him a towel, which he quickly used to wrap around himself while forcing out the water in his hair. At this rate, he might just go ahead and cut it. Drying the hair out, his right hand briefly spasmed, and it took all his 20-plus years of training as a shinobi to stop himself from letting go of the hairdryer. Despite how smooth he wished to be, Aiko saw through the deception and moved forward to help him, forcing it out of his unwilling grip. She stood behind him and started drying the hair. His eyes trailed back down to his scarred right hand. It had never healed completely. In between his pride stopping him from receiving help from Oldman Tatsumi and his immediate seclusion, the hand had been left unattended to, and it was only his inhuman fortitude and his immense control of his body that stopped it from getting any worse. His hair done, they moved to his dressing room, swiftly picking out another black sweatshirt and shorts combo, ignoring the pointed stare Aiko was sending to the more formal-style yukata. With that done, they left the room, taking the short walk to the car. The car stopped just outside a medium-sized hospital deep in Osaka. During the drive, he noted the lack of any real cursed spirit worth the name. The fact that there wasn't a single one to be seen around the hospital itself, despite how it should be a breeding ground for them, told him that either Shoko had not slacked in her training, which was highly unbelievable, or most likely she had strong-armed someone from Jujutsu High to do it. He stepped out of the car, ignoring the looks and stares he got for his long white hair, and walked into the hospital, Aiko trailing behind him. Sending his senses and cursed energy out in a pulse, he picked up her location along with a visitor's own that brought a smile to his face. He knew exactly who she strong-armed now. Taking the short walk, he sent a simple genjutsu at the nurses who tried to either talk to him or stop him from walking even deeper into the hospital. So far, his genjutsu had proven to only work effectively on non-sorcerers or the few that were immensely weak-willed, and even then it wasn't for long. The rough flow of cursed energy inevitably broke the hold the genjutsu had. The secret to it was following the flow the same way a ship followed straight behind massive waves to avoid capsizing, and people with less cursed energy generally had smoother flow. His reworking of chakra techniques was going at a steady pace. At this point, he realized it was a marathon, not a race, and was okay with it. His walk ended up with them directly at a door with a small placard indicating her office with her name on it. He gave it a quick knock, ignoring the rapid movement and chuckles from one of the two people inside. Opening the door, he was greeted by the sight of Shoko halfway out of her chair and to the window, intent on throwing out the half butt of the cigarette she held in her hand, while Satoru sat on a chair on wheels, moving about with a carton of juice to his lips and a wide grin. "Jiki-kun. You miniature bastard." The simultaneous cries created a smile on his face. "I heard you got past your forging with a bang," Satoru began, spinning his chair to face him. "Sorry I wasn't around. There was a hunger deity that was giving the higher-ups some problems." "It's okay, Satoru. It was nothing much." "Nothing much," he says, just after drawing attention from half of the Jujutsu Society. "Goddamn brat," Shoko barked out as she leisurely walked back to her seat to continue her smoking. "Are you allowed to smoke in a hospital, Shoko-san?" he asked, playing up his innocence and ignorance. "Doesn't matter, you brat. Next time don't just barge in," she replied, waving away the smoke. Trust Shoko to be rebellious, then decide to follow up on one of the most challenging and serious occupations he had seen in this life and his past. Turning his head to his grinning cousin, he spoke, "Why are you here, though? I thought you would have come to see me at least after your trip." "Mao, our primary doctor, resigned. The principal asked me to offer the cushy gig up to, and I've told you I'm not interested." Satoru bulldozed past her interruptions and continued, "The great and beautiful Shoko Yeri." He finished by spinning the chair and pointing towards the thoroughly unimpressed visage of Shoko. "Too dangerous. I like my present job already and $120,000 a year. When am I starting?" The whiplash of a conversation forced a laugh from behind him, and the weight of three gazes fell on the thoroughly surprised and frozen form of Aiko. "Aiko-chan," Satoru called out before spinning his chair past Jiki in a feat of skill and athleticism that Jiki was certain was impossible. "Heard you've been taking your best care of my precious Jiki-kun." He tuned out her reply and then walked towards the table where Shoko sat behind. As he got closer, his hands picked that moment to spasm out of his control, and the motion drew her eyes like a moth to fire. "You hurt yourself a lot for a brat that is not even of age to attend Jujutsu High yet." He gave her a shrug in reply before sitting opposite her and stretching his hands over the table for her to grasp. He could feel the way her cursed energy slipped into his hands the moment she held his. She sent it scanning and categorizing his injuries and widened her eyes with each passing second. "Did you try punching a wall or something? All the bones from your knuckles to your forearm have some degree of fracture. The only reason they didn't break is because of the way you braced your muscles to hold everything in check." "I was trying out a new technique," was his nonchalant reply. "The technique that killed Tanaka?" He turned his head at Satoru's intrusion into the conversation. He had an uncharacteristic frown on his face as he looked at his injured arm with his eye wrap off and his eyes focused on the hand. "Don't worry about it," he told his elder cousin. "The only reason it worked was because of his lack of the 6 eyes." Satoru's reply was a dismissive hemph before focusing even harder on him. "I worry less about what it would do to me than its effect on your body. There's a seriously unhealthy amount of stress on your body. On the upside, if you grow old enough, your physique would be better built for it," he finished off with a soft smile at Jiki. "What do you mean if?" Shoko butted in as she finished with the healing. "The little brat is just as stubborn as you. I doubt you have an enemy strong enough to put either of you down or even have the means to pull it off." "But he can," Satoru cut in. It took him a second longer to figure out who Satoru was talking about. Toji Fushiguro. The rumored sorcerer killer had only been seen a few times ever since the assassination of the plasma vessel. Every time Satoru had hunted down the news of his appearance, it always ended up with him finding the dead body of whoever Toji's original target was. The scarred man was truly living up to the Invisible Man title. He's never bothered coming after us since then. I don't think we should be worried about him. Jiki tried to defuse the situation, even though he knew the probability was always present. You're right. Satoru walked up to him and ruffled his white locks. I'm also supposed to let the principal know of your approval, he nodded to Shoko. Be right back. A split second later, and he was gone. Jiki noted Satoru had gotten so much faster with his teleportation. I'll be taking my leave too, he let Shoko know as he walked out. His only reply was a lazy wave. What do you think about an early lunch, Aiko? Her distant eyes took a split second to refocus on him before she smiled back. Her follow-up nod was enough of a response for him. They sat under a shade just outside the restaurant. It felt so nice, he realized. The outside world, that is. He had spent so much time stuck in the clan grounds he had forgotten his plans of truly exploring the world. He still had a year left until he was supposed to enroll at Jujutsu High. He looked up from his drink and saw Aiko staring listlessly into her unopened can of soda and untouched lunch. Maybe waiting for her to come to him about it wasn't the best plan, he realized with a frown. What's wrong, Aiko? The firmness of his voice drew her attention immediately. With wide eyes staring at him, she automatically tried to deflect the question. The sun was, your behavior has nothing to do with the sun, Aiko, he replied softly this time, giving her a questioning look. He had thrown the life rope, and it was her choice to grab onto it. It took her a couple of minutes, which he was comfortable resting in before she replied to him. What do you know about where I come from, Jiki-san? She asked rhetorically, but he realized with a surprising pain in his chest, too little. She continued before he could dwell on it too much. I come from a small village in the Tohoku area in northern Japan, in the Iwate prefecture. It was a boring life, a nice one, but deep in the countryside, nothing interesting ever seemed to truly happen. Till something did. Her tone got darker toward the end and drew Jiki's attention more. A special grace spirit was born. I can't remember much, but I remember it took the help of the former clan head of the Gojo clan and the late Mikoto-san to chase it off. She finished with a soft smile and an affirming nod at him. Your mother. He went rigid with shock at the revelation. The name brought memories of a kind yet strong and loving woman, with hair of black and a heart of gold. The memories were tainted with the image of her back to him as she sat in Saiza while he plunged a sword into it. Aiko returned her gaze back to the untouched soda in her hands, continuing her story. My family was saved early enough, yet our farm was destroyed. I was given up to Mikoto-san, both as payment for the aid rendered and because they were not sure they would be able to raise me well. Mikoto-san gladly accepted me, and that is how I ended up here, although I never lost contact with my birth parents. Aiko's surprising loyalty towards him in particular suddenly made much sense. She must have left the village very young, before moving into the Gojo clan. Yet, it didn't answer the current problem. She glanced up at him before looking down once more. For the past 2 weeks, I've been unable to reach them, and I fear they have fallen sick. I considered requesting a short time away from Satoru-san, but, okay, he interjected, looking straight at her. Was this truly what she had spent so long thinking about? He quietly mused. But who will take care of? He noted the way she seemed to forget he had other maids now and interjected again. Simple, I'll be coming with you, he stated flatly without giving her a chance to discourage him. He was already looking to stretch his legs a bit, and this was a good chance to do so. With a sharp nod at him, she quickly rushed to her feet, citing the need to use the bathroom. He kept quiet about how he could see the tears forming already and gave her the space she needed to herself. A bus drove them through rolling fields of green. Even in Konoha, the famed village hidden in the leaves, he had never seen such a beautiful expanse of chest-high grass that seemed so natural yet perfectly groomed. The closest comparison he could make was the village hidden in the grass, Kusagakure. But even those grasses were generally fertilized by the amount of blood spilled on them, as the place was notable for all the clandestine activities around its borders. This is the last stop, the driver called out as the bus slowed to a halt. Aiko had not lied about it. The village was truly out in the sticks. He followed behind her and stepped off the bus. The feeling that struck him the moment his feet hit the ground sent his cursed energy igniting around his body as he sent scarlet roving eyes in search of the danger. All his eyes could see were rolling fields with groups of widely spaced houses further ahead and a looming mountain range mixed with a forest that spread out in a semicircle around the village. Is everything all right? Aiko called out the moment she noticed how tense he was. Forcing himself to relax, he nodded and followed behind her as she walked towards the village. Could he have imagined that immense feeling of grief? He considered as he walked behind her. The village had gotten weird recently, Fumi noted with a brief glance at a shadow at the edge of her vision. Nobara held her by the hand and dragged her along with the bullheaded stubbornness she knew and loved the other girl for. Another jerk of movement at the corner of her eyes drew her attention and made her shrink further into her turtleneck sweater as they walked toward the park. The shadows had grown darker. Recently nightfall came faster than usual and lasted even longer. Their normally weird neighbors had grown even weirder. It seemed like every day their uncanny smiles and laser-focused attention on her and Nobara seemed to grow by the day. The few people in the village she and Nobara had deemed the normal ones had grown erratic and irrational, case in point why they were going to the park. The suddenly empty park with only 4 boys and moving shadows, she realized with surprise. The moment they crossed the threshold to the park, the 4 playing boys snapped their heads to them all at once. The inhuman nature of the movement forced her to hide behind Nobara. Nobara, unknowing or maybe uncaring of the why, stood straight, arms folded, and stared down the 4 bigger boys. They all shared the plain brown hair and black eyes of countryside folks. They were also kids who had been avoiding them ever since the last time Nobara beat them up for pranking her. Over the last few weeks, they had grown bolder, angrier, and more wrathful, with more spite in them than their skinny frames could seemingly hold. "Which one of you took Fumi-chan's shoe?" Nobara asked with all the authority her 13-year-old frame could muster. The 4 boys looked at them with an eerie and glassy stare that revolted her. "You're not going to answer, huh?" She barked out while rolling up the sleeves of her shirt and walking forward. Fumi made a grasp at her clothes to stop her, but the bigger girl was too fast. Squaring up to face the biggest boy, she asked one more time, her voice low with anger. "If you don't tell me who took Fumi-chan's shoe, I'm going to break your ugly nose in." The boy remained quiet and still, while his eerie eyes started twitching. His breath got harder. The whole scene finally got to Nobara, and she took an unconscious step back the same moment the boy's hand snapped forward to grab her. Her scream was cut short as a sudden monstrous presence pressed down on the area. The air felt heavy, she realized as she struggled to draw in a single breath, while her limbs suddenly lay paralyzed. "What are you doing, boy?" Those 5 simple words cut through the pressure like a knife, and she could suddenly breathe once more. Hands on her knees and hair over her head, she forced as much air as she could into her lungs before forcing herself to look up once more. A long white-haired teen held the bully by his arm a few inches away from Nobara's wide eyes. She had not even seen him move. He held onto the increasingly clear-eyed and shocked boy's arm with a sweatshirt-covered arm while his face was tilted to the side, not even looking at the altercation. He just stopped. Fumi allowed her eyes to follow his and saw he was looking at the mountain range that surrounded their village. The same mountain range old Granny Kujisaki warned them from entering. For some reason, the sight of it this time in the fading sunlight sent a chill down her spine, and she could feel her limbs getting heavy once more. "I'm certain there's something going on in your village now, Aiko-san. Do you think I should call Satoru?" The white-haired older teen's voice cut through the pressure once more as he turned his head away from the mountain and faced them for the first time. The sight of red orbs slowly spinning in a sea of black shocked her out of her frozen state. "If you deem it important, Jiki-kun," came the response from a woman walking up to them with 2 bags in her hands and an exasperated look on her face. The black hair and amber eyes drew her attention once more. She knew that look. "Aiko-chan." Nobara shouted excitedly before recovering from the past few seconds like they never happened and springing up to run at the older woman. Fumi's wide eyes went from the smiling Aiko to the confused older brown-haired bully, the white-haired teen who had a contemplative expression on his face as he looked at the boy in his grasp, and finally, the mountain range that suddenly seemed normal once more and wondered if she was the only sane person here. Ever since he stepped foot into the town, he could tell something was off. It wasn't just the brief spike of cursed energy that he felt at first. It was the atmosphere of the village. He had been to a few villages like this before. Villages on the outskirts of major towns and cities. Villages that still stuck hard to centuries-old traditions and beliefs. Beliefs they molded and that molded them in turn. In this small village, he felt it more keenly than ever. His presence in the village seemed to have stirred something. The few people they had seen either stared at them with caution or heavy mistrust. Even the seemingly familiar form of Aiko didn't seem to be enough to break that air. Yet for all the animosity he had experienced, It all had the tinge of mundane dislike. Till now. The scene they had stumbled upon while heading toward Aiko's family house changed everything. He could feel the twisted cursed energy in the boy. He could almost taste the putrid flavor of grief, desire, and hate. Whatever had sunk its claws into the boy seemed to have done it without any real care or finesse. It had seemingly puppeted his form and used the body as a node to control the three others. His eyes wandered to the side, and the overbearing presence of the mountain seemed to loom no matter where you were in the village. A rapid movement drew his attention as he looked to the side and at the girl with her brown hair stuck into two ponytails. She gave him a nervous glance once more before catching his eyes and snapping it forward once more. Aiko had taken to walking ahead, drawing the attention of the other brown-haired girl, instead of allowing her to pester him with questions about his hair. It left him stuck behind with the more quiet kid. The girl had seemed perpetually nervous and shy in the few minutes he had known her, and it took him a split second to remember her name. Fumi, right? He asked as he walked beside her, while she fidgeted with her arms and gave him an unsure nod. For some reason, he found himself leading conversations in this new life more than he liked. But he liked the thought of taking the long walk to Aiko's house beside a nervous wreck even less. He glanced at her clothes and noted the different quality compared to the other rougher fabrics and clothes he had seen on others so far. Been in town for long? Not really, came her reply a few seconds later, and after another glance at him, she continued, my dad took us to Tokyo after I was born, but after my mom. She stuttered for a second before bravely soldiering on, we came back, and we've been here ever since. This village had a way of drawing back the people that escaped it, he noticed with a frown. Sorry for your loss. I don't suppose you know someone with an even better knowledge of the village? He asked. Granny Kojisaki knows, the girl suddenly spoke up with a bright cheer. She has been here the longest, almost as long as Granny Kimiko. She also makes the best sweets and tells us scary stories of the mountain god to scare us away from the range. A mountain god? He sent another quick glance at the range once more. He doubted it. He had not heard of any actual deity so far, and he was not sure of their presence in this new world. He also had to admit he had not actually started his studies officially, so the probability he was missing something was there. Granny Kojisaki then, that was where he was going to get better information on the village. We are here, Aiko stated as they got to the end of the street. They stopped at a small single-story building with a farm or small garden. He reassessed, just to the side of it. All right, big sis Aiko, I'll let Grandma know you're here. The other girl with a lighter shade of brown hair called out. I still have a score to settle with those four bastards, she added, slamming her fists together. I would advise against that, he said as he walked up to them. He had dispersed the cursed energy in the boys by sending his into the boy that acted as a node for the technique. But he was not certain it had completely lost whatever control it had over him. Her cheeks turned red as she looked at him. She gave him a single nod before grabbing onto her friend and running off. He looked back at their retreating figure in surprise. Had he said something wrong? Looking back at Aiko, she had a knowing smile on her face as she looked back at him. What did I do? Nothing, Jiki-kun. Other than being yourself, she stated before turning around and walking up the stairs to press the doorbell. She had been happy since they got here, he noted. Happy enough that he had noticed she smiled more often. The fact that he had something to do with it made him feel a tingle in his chest. Ding dong. The bell only had to ring once before he heard a footstep walk towards the door. It opened up to reveal a small older woman with shrunken features and an ominous smile. Miss Kimiko? Aiko questioned in surprise as she saw the woman. The woman's disquieting smile grew wider as she saw Aiko. Aiko-chan. We've been waiting for you for a while now. The older woman looked behind her and met his gray gaze with an annoyed frown. We didn't expect you to bring a guest along. The more she spoke, the more certain Jiki was that something was horribly wrong. She had planned for Aiko's return despite how spontaneous it was, yet she had not predicted him? He sent a pulse of cursed energy out and noted hers were of an average size but even darker in texture. He had learned to taste the different flavors of cursed energy, and hers was a malevolent shade that was bolstered by another. Aiko asked, still surprised. I've been checking up on and taking care of your parents while they've been sick, but since you're here, I'll leave you to it, the old woman said before walking out without giving Jiki another glance. They entered the house to see it was remarkably clean and well taken care of. They finally met Aiko's parents in the living room, where they sat, looking at the television with unseeing eyes. "Father? Mother?" Aiko called out as she walked towards them. There was no movement from either of them, and Aiko rushed towards them with tears in her eyes. Once again Jiki found himself out of his element and was not sure what to do, so he stood at the threshold and watched his favorite person in the world cry. Sun rays filtered into his bedroom as the next day began, and he forced himself awake from another dream that featured a blue-eyed and white-haired Mikoto. He had still not come to terms with the revelation and had locked up the thought of it for another time. Slipping out of his bed, he made a few stretches to work out the kinks in his muscles. It was the work of a few minutes to take a quick shower and dress up in a black short-sleeved shirt and shorts. He walked downstairs knowing Aiko was already up, and judging by the way she was talking and cleaning up after her parents, she might have never given herself the chance to rest. Instead of breaking her concentration, he continued his walk and stepped out of the house. Something was wrong with this village, and he was going to find out what it was. He stood under the early morning sun before taking a breath and coiling his cursed energy in a feat of control impossible for most people. A split second later, he sent it out in a wide pulse that exploded with him at the epicenter. Most of the cursed energy he picked up had the sense of an unawakened human, but a few of them had a slight tang of what he was dubbing corruption to them. Yet, he couldn't run around breaking down doors on mere suspicion. A second later he finally felt Nobara's own. It was surprisingly more active than anybody would have expected from a kid in the back end of nowhere. But he knew the activity for what it was. Cursed technique usage. Fumi told him that the person who would have the best idea of the village was a Granny Kyujisake. It was not a big stretch of the imagination to think Nobara stayed with her grandmother. With a destination in mind now, he moved. A blur later, he was jumping from roof to roof, slipping past the few people who decided to look up and ignoring the remaining. This was the first time he had gone roof hopping in years, but he had not lost the feel for it. His run took him further away from the village and closer to the mountain range. This close, he could see the house he was running to. It had the old architecture that spoke of an old clan that refused to completely let go of its roots, even in modern-day Japan. This high up, he was able to see further past the forest that bordered the house, and his attention was drawn to the giant straw doll that stood alone in the midst of old and broken-down buildings. The straw figure was weighted down by steel chains wrapped with cursed seals, as well as giant nails that anchored it further into the ground. He ignored it and continued his run to the mansion. There would be time to investigate the strange structure later. The moment he landed in the compound in a crouch, his instinct sent out a signal to his brain like he had touched a live wire. A split second later and 4 cursed energy-enhanced projectiles came at him from the 4 cardinal points with a solid boom of the sound barrier breaking in their wake. The projectiles moved at such speed that he knew a single solid hit would render him dead. His gray eyes instinctively split and morphed into their 3-tomo form. With the aid of their enhanced perception and slowed cognition, he saw the projectiles with better clarity. Spikes. 4 cursed energy-enhanced barbs of pain and agony. He spun to the side just as the first one got to him, dodging the implement of murder, and watched how it blew past him before carving a trench through the forest that demarcated the house from the mountain range. The second one was directly behind the first, and instead of dodging, he flicked his feet up with as much reinforcement as his leg could take, kicking the projectile up. The third one forced him to tilt to the side, even as it tore a small gash in his side before it continued on its journey into the forest. His eyes calculated the speed the fourth one was moving at, and he knew he could not dodge it. Not this close. Instead, he spread out his hand and arrested the motion of the falling second spike before spinning his body on the spot and swinging it in an arc that deflected the last spike into the sky and towards the mountain range. The force of the blow sent a vibration up his hands, and he could feel them lose feeling for a few seconds. The force of the last spike slamming into the mountain range sent an explosion through it and forced a small, localized rock slide. TCH, the stubborn Gojo brat refused to die. The grumpy voice forced his eyes back to the house just as it opened, and an old woman stepped out. Her hunched form was being aided by a walking stick, while her formerly brown hair had lost its luster and turned a gray-white held in a ponytail. Yet her brown eyes had lost none of their spark. He remembered the quote, "Beware an old man in a profession where men usually die young." A quote that held water in both his past life and, unsurprisingly, in this one too. He stood with a spike in his hand and prepared to launch back at the woman before a familiar brown-haired petite girl burst out behind the older woman and turned to face her with a scolding wag of her hand. "Stop it, Grandma. That is the boy that came over with big sister Aiko." This was the grandma Kojisaki then. He smoothly transitioned from a throw and instead buried the spike into the earth and twitched his palms to see the damage. Fortunately, motion and sensation slowly returned to the hand. Oh, shocking. How could I have known that with such a shock of white hair coming at us like a missile? The older woman called out with a dry tone and an exaggerated look of surprise. She was definitely not fooling anybody with that. I knew you forgot. Nobara reached out and hugged her with a smile. Jiki was forced to look back at them and reassess his opinion of the girl and her innocence.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.